Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 261, Ridicule. While Johansson recited the 10 Commandments for an assassin, Zen Luo sat on the ground. He asked the referee loudly, "Sir, since my opponent will not fight with me face to face, can I just sit here and rest?" The referee inside the arena looked confused. Since each warrior had a unique way of fighting, he did not answer Zen's question. But Zen had asked the question loudly enough for the audience to hear. Of all the fights during the All Peaks competition, the ones in which Zen participated were the most interesting. Zen had drawn more attention than most participants, including Roche. As Zen was only at the second grade of the nature level, there was a huge skill difference between him and the other contestants. Every disciple was curious to see how Zen would perform in the competition. Moreover, Zen's last fight against Vale had so many ups and downs. The disciples were expecting to watch a more lively fight. However, this battle between Zen and Johansson was not as per their expectation. From the beginning, neither side spoke to the other. They stood on the court, face to face and then attacked each other only once. They even didn't collide into each other. The fight seemed dull. Zen's words confirmed what the audience had felt. By speaking out loud, Zen was letting the onlookers know that it was because of Johansson that the fight was boring. "Shoot, what's the matter with Johansson Zhang?" a disciple asked. "Zen is sitting on the ground and doing nothing. And Johansson does not dare to attack him." He added. "Is this a competition? I'm feeling sleepy," another disciple said. Is it true that Johansson is a personal disciple of a saint? Maybe he was only boasting as he cannot face Zen. He can't be one of the top 5 disciples on the list. It looks more like he is one of the last 5. A third disciple remarked. That's true. Maybe Johansson is the timidest personal disciple. He has not shown up before now, nor does he dare to fight. Why doesn't he just admit defeat? I am falling asleep waiting for some action. Another disciple added. What Zen had said was an eye-opener. Soon the disciples were even more dissatisfied with what Johansson was doing and started to discuss among each other. Seeing what was happening, all the personal disciples, including Patrick and Tracy, smiled. The personal disciples in the audience knew why Johansson was behaving peculiarly. Johansson's ambition was to be a top assassin. It was impossible for an assassin to fight against others face to face like a regular warrior. Asking an assassin to fight like that was the equivalent of expecting an archer to compete with cavalry. Assassins were experts in moves that killed a person in one hit. Johansson might attack only once, but that was enough to decide the result of the match. This was why fighting against an assassin was boring. Anyone who understood this would know that a silent fight was even more dangerous than a regular one. Not all conflicts were settled with visible weapons. Sometimes psychological warfare or psywar was required. Johansson had done this well from the beginning. At least as per Tracy, Patrick, and the other personal disciples, Johansson had performed perfectly. He had successfully remained hidden. Neither Zen nor the personal disciples at the Illuminating Soul Realm were capable of finding him. But Zen's comment had destroyed everything Johansson had worked for. The sarcasm from the audience made it seem like Johansson's high-level hiding skills were something they could ridicule. Patrick Pei, who was always serious, said with a smile, "Zen is naughty. I want to know how Johansson is feeling now. He must be hiding somewhere nearby. Haha, I think he is probably inflamed with rage." Tracy's eyes shone as she replied, "I am more eager about fighting against Zen. After I win, I can do whatever to him, right? What should I do to punish him? Aren't you worried that you may lose? If that happens, Zen can do whatever he wants to you." Patrick laughed as he asked her. Tracy's expression conveyed that she didn't quite care. Then she giggled and said, "If that's true, then I will allow him to do anything to me. Who knows what he will do?" Everyone was rendered speechless at Tracy's comment. Patrick rolled his eyes and sat on the ground. He could do nothing to this crazy girl, and he was always speechless due to her eccentricity. At the same time, Johansson, who was hiding nearby, clenched his fists. He was upset. He understood why his master instructed him to kill Zen. His opponent was truly a wicked guy. He was troublesome and fiendish. Hearing the acerbic comments from the audience, Johansson was tempted to rush out and kill them one by one. But instead, he closed his eyes and tried to restrain himself. The disciples of each peak were as weak as bugs when compared to Johansson's abilities. He could kill them using only his finger. But now they dared to criticize him and even defamed him. How could they have the courage to do that? This was all Zen's doing. He was the only one to be blamed. The more Johansson thought about it, the more he despised Zen. Just as Johansson was contemplating his feelings toward his opponent, Zen turned in Johansson's direction, as though he could sense something. A pensive expression could be seen on Zen's face as he continued to stare in Johansson's direction. Johansson felt anxious at once. He calmed himself and continued to recite the 10 Commandments for an assassin. Control myself. Control myself. Guard against arrogance, rashness, anger and... Johansson was now in such a situation. He was annoyed but had to hold back his emotions. This was a frustrating situation to be in. Johansson had thought that he could easily control the fight against Zen. He wanted Zen to panic and fear him. He had intended to drive him insane, step by step. Then he could conquer Zen's defensive force spiritually and make Zen break down. But now everything seemed to be in the opposite way. Zen sat on the ground leisurely and even closed his eyes to rest. Johansson became more and more furious when he heard the onlookers' comments. He could not stand it anymore. If this continued, Johansson knew he would become too anxious and would probably expose his position to Zen. So, he decided to attack Zen as soon as possible. The comments from the disciples were another reason that drove Johansson to act prematurely. He was ranked the 5th among all the disciples of the Cloud sect, and yet, he was being spoken about as if he was a failure. The black shadows that had been floating in the sky now started to whirl. And Johansson mixed with them and moved at the same speed. Even though Johansson chose to start the fight, the disciples still spoke poorly about him. Johansson finally made a move. The rumor is that he is practicing the skills of an assassin. And as an assassin, Johansson must learn how to be patient. I can't believe he decided to start this soon. I can tell that he will lose the competition. One disciple said. I agree with you. Being an assassin, Johansson should act like an assassin. I heard that there was an assassin in the eastern region who concealed himself for half a year to kill his target. That is what an assassin should do. Johansson is far from being that assassin. He doesn't even have the right attitude. Another disciple continued the conversation. Hearing what the disciples were saying, Johansson very nearly went mad. These idiots are going too far. When I was waiting and didn't fight, they said it was boring to watch the fight. Now I have decided to fight, the disciples still have a reason to speak badly about me. They don't know when to stop. Johansson muttered in his mind. A moment later, Johansson had no time to consider what the disciples were saying. Once an assassin decided to commerce, he must kill his target in one strike. He could not change what had happened before, and now, he must kill Zen. The black shadows whirled faster, and so did Johansson. Since Zen was still sitting on the ground with his eyes closed, Johansson felt as though something was not quite right. Zen seemed not to care about what was happening in the arena. As Zen was still as calm as before, to Johansson, it appeared as though Zen was looking down upon him and provoking him. Johansson decided to implement his plan. It doesn't matter what you plan to do or how highly others speak of you. You are going to die, Johansson thought. An assassin would not hide his aura at the moment he started his move. When a leopard hiding in the grass rushes at an antelope, it roars at the same moment. The sound not only terrifies the prey but it also freezes it for a short moment, thus giving the predator a good opportunity. Johansson was the leopard while Zen was his antelope. A nearly solid aura rushed toward Zen. It was Johansson's killing intent. And his killing intent was unique. A force of his soul was hidden in it. Even a warrior at the illuminating soul realm could not stand Johansson's attack. Zen was only at the 2nd grade of the nature level. He would be unable to bear this killing intent, especially since it included a soul attack. Johansson had collected some information about Zen. He had watched the fight between Zen and Vale from the beginning to the end. Johansson also noticed a detail that Vale had said something about one of Zen's trump cards. Zen seemed to be able to attack with his soul. But Zen was only a warrior at the 2nd grade of the nature level. How strong was his soul? Johansson had eaten a soul-nurturing herb each day since he was a baby. The price of a soul-nurturing herb was very high. One plant cost as much as over 100 cubic crystals. Although the Burning Sky Empire had destroyed the Shadow Group was still wealthy. And most of their fortune had been spent on Johansson, who was their only hope. Even the eldest sons of the top 7 noble clans could not afford to eat a soul-nurturing herb each day. It was true that the top 7 noble clans had the money to buy many soul-nurturing herbs. But they could not pile all their resources onto one person. That was too risky. However, the situation was different for Johansson. He was the only hope of the Shadow Group in nearly 300 years. He was the only talent among them all. Having eaten so many soul-nurturing herbs, Johansson had felt his soul grow day by day. And after he had cultivated his soul for so many years, Johansson was confident that his soul was more powerful than that of the warriors at the same level as him. That was why he didn't pay attention to Zen's soul attack. In his eyes, there was no comparison between his soul and Zen's. In Johansson's mind, he could easily turn Zen into an utterly useless person without a soul just by using his killing intent. Zen Luo, let me see how you will deal with my killing intent. Johansson scoffed in his mind. Chapter 262, Flying Knife vs. Short Sword. Now that Johansson decided to strike, he wouldn't limit himself to only using the soul attack. Once an assassin made a move, he would go for the kill. Of course, if his opponent had been somebody else, Johansson might have shown him mercy, or say, not caused a fatal injury to his opponent. Now that Johansson had regarded Zen as a man he must kill, he would not reserve his strength. Just as Johansson launched the soul attack, a beam of bright light shot out from his hand. The light warped into the shape of a short sword, a snake-shaped short sword. The short sword was Johansson's family heirloom. It was a fairy weapon that had been passed down within their family for several hundred years. When the Zhang family was undermined by the Burning Sky Empire 300 years ago, most of its treasures and fortunes were kept in one of the secret realms of their Shadow Group. Thus the snake-shaped short sword was preserved within the family, and eventually, it was handed down to Johansson. He preferred to first befuddle his opponent's mind with the soul attack, and then cut the opponent's throat with the snake-shaped short sword. Although this assassinating method was quite simple, it was almost impossible to guard against it. In most cases, as long as the opponent's soul was not strong enough to resist his soul attack, in no way could he escape from Johansson's snake-shaped short sword. Even though Zen's flesh was incredibly strong, he could not be able to fend off the snake-shaped short sword. Therefore, as per Johansson, by implementing his two-step attacking method, there was no doubt that Zen would die. Go to perdition, I'm destined to be a world-famous assassin while you are doomed to be reduced to a pile of bones. As to the little locusts that mocked me from the audience, they are bound to admire me, and to listen to legends about me. However, at the precise moment that Johansson's soul attack targeted Zen's mind, an unexpected event happened. The soul attack, to put it simply, was a confrontation on a spiritual level. Since Johansson had been consuming the soul-nurturing herb since he was a child, his soul was much stronger than those of ordinary people. The soul-nurturing herb was a precious plant, but its effect on enhancing a person's soul was quite limited. That was something no one could change. Even Cloud Sect had no books on soul cultivation method other than a few manuals on the use of soul attack. It was just too difficult to cultivate one's spirit. Accordingly, to nurture one's spirit with the soul-nurturing herb was a very difficult and expensive project in the first place. But Zen's spirit had been refined by the giant mysterious smelting furnace. It could be said that the inhuman suffering thoroughly remolded Zen. Although there were ways to strengthen one's soul and some ascetic practitioners would adopt very drastic measures to prepare their souls, a human soul was a fragile thing. Any carelessness might damage it, and if the injury was severe, the man would become an idiot. But when Zen's soul was being refined by the black fire, it was also being repaired by the 7 colored lights of the huge furnace. After being tempered like that, Zen's soul was indeed quite resilient. In comparison to Zen's soul, Johansson's soul seemed weak and fragile. Therefore, when targeted by Johansson's attempt to kill, Zen merely felt a little alarmed. The moment Johansson's soul attack reached him, Zen's eyes widened a little, but he did not react at all. The result of a battle between souls would often come out in 1 second. According to legends, some mighty practitioners could battle in the spiritual space. 2 peerless martial arts experts could determine which was more powerful solely by combating with their souls. In that case, the power of the soul attack would practically equal the attacker's strength. However, that kind of contest was not something that Zen or Johansson could try at present. A soul attack, Zen sneered. After warding off Johansson's murderous soul attack, a grayish spike was formed in his mind. The spike shot out from between Zen's eyebrows and lunged straight at Johansson. At the same time, the broken flying knife also appeared in Zen's hand. A broken flying knife. Zen's attack strategy was very similar to Johansson's two-step assassinating method. They both exploited the soul attack to unsettle the mind of their opponent, and then took advantage of his disoriented state to assassinate him with a knife. Zen had chosen not to use this method until now because, on one hand, he hoped to hide his ace card till the final stage, and on the other hand, this method was Zen's killing move. In light of the sharpness of the broken flying knife, Zen was afraid that he might lose control and kill someone by accident. It was true that the contenders in the arena would try their best to win. In such competitive situations, some participants would occasionally be seriously injured or even die. However, given that the arena was not a real battlefield, Zen let his values and morals guide him. In this situation, however, Zen had decided to use his killing method, as from the start, he had sensed that Johansson was determined to kill him. The minute the battle began, Johansson had established that he was not aiming at defeating Zen, but he wanted to kill him. As to how to distinguish good from the evil, Zen had a simple belief: if others treated him well, he would also be friendly toward them. However, if others intended to murder him, he would return the favor. Being kind to your enemy means being cruel to yourself. Although Vale, his opponent in the previous fight, was very obnoxious, Zen did not detect any trace of murderous intent from Vale. Vale was merely seeking to subdue Zen and to thwart his martial arts aspirations. Thus, Zen decided to be merciful toward Vale, and even gave him a helping hand when he deviated into madness. In contrast, Johansson had decided to kill Zen. And so, Zen had no scruples anymore. In fact, Zen had been on his guard for Johansson's killing intent since the very beginning. And Zen could tell that Saint Zara and Saint Vienna were behind all this. Nonetheless, he couldn't be sure. Therefore, he would not point it out in front of all the disciples of Cloud Sect as he had no evidence yet. While keeping a lookout for Johansson, Zen also figured out what he was thinking. If Johansson wanted to have a prolonged tangle with Zen, Zen could do nothing about it. However, now that Johansson was enraged by his one remark, Zen knew that despite his great power, he was not a very skilled assassin. And that was why Zen just flopped onto the ground and said offensive things that would lead the disciples of Cloud Sect to provoke Johansson further. As Johansson felt that Zen had blocked his soul attack, his expression changed. He came to realize that he had made a huge mistake. The soul attack of Zen that Vale just described is definitely one of his trump cards. How can it be? How is it possible? His body is already formidably strong for a man at the second grade of the nature level, but how can his soul be so tough as well? My soul attack didn't hurt him at all. Is he a human being? Just as Johansson was trying to rationalize his opponent's abilities, Zen had launched his counterattack, the spiritual thorn. In an instant, the soul thorn pierced Johansson's brain. Johansson felt a powerful force assault his soul, and the pain caused nearly sent him into a coma. But compared to Zen's prior opponents, Johansson's performance was fairly great. As Johansson had been nourishing his soul since childhood, his soul was far stronger than that of a normal practitioner's. Hence, Johansson's soul managed to withstand Zen's spiritual thorn. As a result, even though Johansson was in excruciating pain, he did not pass out. He might have lost the match on the spiritual level, but he still had his snake-shaped short sword. Once this snake-shaped short sword penetrates Zen's body, there is absolutely no hope for him. However, precisely at this moment, he saw the broken flying knife emerge in Zen's hand. A broken knife, Johansson snorted. He wants to repel my snake-shaped short sword with that thing. His snake-shaped short sword was a fairy weapon. Even if Zen's broken flying knife were also a fairy weapon, after being damaged, the heavenly essence it contained would disperse as time went by. The more severe the damage, the faster its heavenly essence would dissipate. At the sight of the broken flying knife in Zen's hand, Johansson assumed that it was, at best, as powerful as a low-grade spiritual weapon. And he had no chance of stopping Johansson's snake-shaped short sword. However, the moment the two weapons clashed, Johansson was dumbstruck. The broken flying knife in Zen's hand knocked the snake-shaped short sword into the air. And Johansson's eyes widened when he saw that the clash left a distinct dent in the blade of his snake-shaped short sword. What surprised him more was that the dent had not been caused by a right-angled collision of two flying blades. It was merely an outcome of the snake-shaped short sword flitting across the broken flying knife from one side. If the two had collided head-on, Johansson's snake-shaped short sword would probably have broken. What is that broken flying knife? How can it still be so powerful even when it's damaged? Johansson was stupefied. While he was frozen in place by the shock he felt, the broken flying knife soared toward his forehead. When Johansson realized what was happening, he was scared out of his wits. If the broken flying knife injured him, he would die. The instinct for survival suddenly surged inside Johansson. He leaned back to dodge the broken flying knife. The escape was narrow as the broken flying knife did scrape Johansson's forehead as it skimmed over his face. Fortunately, the gash wasn't too deep. When Johansson drew himself back, he hid among the shadows in midair. Zen jumped to his feet with a jeer, beckoned with his left hand, and the broken flying knife flew back to his hand. The two fought at top speed. This time, it happened in a blink of an eye, but it was way more dangerous than any previous battles. The disciples also realized that Zen and Johansson were risking their lives in this battle. The seriousness of the contenders and the stakes were so high that the disciples watched the fight with bated breath. Then, they were dazed for quite a while before they began to discuss it. How risky. I never knew that Zen has a weapon. His weapon is a broken flying knife. That knife is definitely not a normal knife. The snake-shaped short sword that Johansson is holding is a fairy weapon. But when Zen's damaged flying knife clashed into it, the snake-shaped short sword got a dent, while the broken flying knife was still intact. This means the broken flying knife is at a much higher grade than the fairy weapon. Zen is indeed hiding his true potential in his attack strategies. I wonder what else he's got. Humph, you're so ignorant. Let me tell you what else Zen has got. Just now when Zen and Johansson attacked each other with their weapons, they were also engaged in another fight, a battle on the spiritual level. It seems that Johansson lost to Zen, and he suffered from that soul combat. There was a large assembly of talents at the All Peaks competition. Although a moment ago Zen and Johansson concluded an attack in just 1 second, only a handful of people had caught on to what had really happened. What? At those words, many disciples showed disbelief on their faces. Chapter 263, Angry Leader. Born with innate superhuman strength, Zen had a super strong corporeal body. Even if he were hit by a spiritual weapon, he wouldn't be hurt. No matter how much the other disciples envied him, it didn't matter. But what if his soul was also that powerful? That would be totally unfair. Why did God favor Zen that much? Every warrior had their own special strength and style. Swordsmen were dexterous, blade men were domineering with destructive power, while assassins had strong hidden abilities, not to mention the ability to kill with a single hit. Those who claimed they were strong in every skill simply meant that they were weak in every aspect. If you had a lot of different talents, you'd be mediocre, because specialization was the key to success. If you put in a lot of time practicing one skill, your other skills would suffer. But Zen was an exception. He was perfectly well-rounded. It was almost an impossible dream. And it was hard to believe it happened to Zen. He was only a boy of 17, and he had only achieved the 2nd grade of the nature level. If people did not believe it, that was understandable. In other words, they admitted that Zen just defeated Johansson in the spirit level, but didn't want to believe that someone of his age was so well-rounded. Seeing the disbelief on people's faces, the disciple shut his mouth. They didn't want to hear more about it, so he said no more. But another disciple backed him up. He's right. Johansson lost to Zen in the soul battle, because he was weaker. I don't know how strong Zen's spirit is, but I'm sure Johansson's spirit is far less powerful. It's easy to tell the powerful from the weak. The result of spirit competition between two warriors could be easily and immediately determined. And it would hardly change. Hearing another disciple say the same thing, the rest of the disciples took a deep breath, dumbfounded and lost in silence. When you're comparing goods, get rid of the poor quality one. When this was applied to people, the poor ones could not survive. The saying was not to judge, but simply to say that a man should be happy with what he already had, and not compare himself to others. As time slipped by, Zen went from the little disciple of Drizzle Peak that nobody knew to the man with extraordinary talents, a superstar in the All Peaks competition. He overshadowed the vast majority of the disciples. Now that Zen was a superstar they looked up to, they would never challenge him. That was how it always was. If someone was a bit better than you might challenge him. But if he were much stronger than you and had earned all kinds of accolades, then you'd never think to compete with him. The image of Zen in their hearts was like an insurmountable mountain, which they would not be able to conquer even if they tried with their whole life. Kenneth, head of the Cloud sect, knitted his eyebrows as he watched the fight in the arena. Based on his strength and judgment, it was easy for him to figure out that the Zen-Johansson fight was risky, so risky that it might result in the death of one or both of them, especially if any of them didn't properly control their strength. The warriors were not the delicate flowers in the greenhouse. To be strong warriors, they had to go through their baptism of blood and fire. That was why Cloud sect would assign so many dangerous missions. That was also why so many warriors chose to join the military to gain more experience. Only walking on the edge of death could they push their potential to the extreme and know what they were truly capable of. However, Kenneth still had a hint of doubt deep inside. Why is Johansson fighting so hard, so ruthlessly? It seems like he's not fighting to win but to kill. Is it because he hates Zen so much? He thought quietly and doubtfully. Kenneth did encourage disciples to give full play to their own strengths, but he didn't want to see any of them die as both of them were Cloud sect's genius disciples. Besides, Zen's talent and strengths were considerable, so he cared about the boy more. Kenneth even had plans for the boy, if he survived. Thus, if Zen were killed by Johansson, he would be a little sad. Just then, a steward showed up. He was ordered by Elder Shu to find out Zen's information in those practicing places recently. This man now handed Elder Shu a jade slip. Elder Shu took the slip, turned around and handed it to Kenneth directly. Kenneth took it, unfolded it and began to scan it. After finishing reading it, he furrowed his brows more tightly. When seeing Kenneth's heavy face, Elder Shu asked carefully, "Your Grace, what did it say?" Kenneth threw the slip to him and said in a pissed tone, "Check it yourself." Elder Shu unfolded the slip and had a quick scan. Then, his face also grew heavy abruptly. On Fire Day, in the month of November, Zen practiced at the Lake of the Magical Fish for the first time. He dived in, and attained a depth of 130 meters underwater. He's only at the first grade of the nature level. Yet he could do such an amazing feat. So he is a rare genius of our Cloud sect. If he could be well trained, he would be capable of miraculous achievements. Written by Stuart Sao. On Water Day, in the month of December, Zen entered the 7-star sword light platform, and resisted 100 waves of magnetic aurora at the trial with the 8th difficulty and also grabbed the sword intent. From the founding of our Cloud sect till now, I have not seen such a disciple. He is a rare talent that comes along once in a million years. Written by Stuart Song. When he finished reading this, his face grew heavier. Kenneth sneered and said, the first time at the 7-star sword light platform, he could pass the trial at the 8th level. Since the establishment of our Cloud sect, I believe that there has not been such a strong disciple. What's more, he even had an epiphany about the sword intent. It seems that Zen is still hiding his real strength now. If it hadn't been for the All Peaks competition, I wouldn't even have known about him. It is one of the duties of the stewards to find out Zen's rare talent. If they can do this, they will be richly rewarded. After a pause, he continued slowly, but such reports, which should be delivered to me, were intercepted by several saints. It was done by Saint Vianna and Saint Zara, right? So these guys, who reached the top grade of illuminating Soul Realm by virtue of the resources of Cloud sect, now think they can do whatever they want. As Kenneth said, he stared at the match and raised his eyebrows. I don't know how the two old men and Zen are connected. But now it seems that they are trying to kill him, and at the All Peaks competition of all places. Johansson is Saint Zara's personal disciple, right? No wonder his first attack against Zen was a deadly action. Elder Shu's face suddenly changed again when he heard Kenneth's words. It was true that Saint Zara and Saint Vianna did have beefs with Zen, based on the slip. But, requiring their own personal disciple to kill Zen at All Peaks competition. Would they go that far? And after Kenneth said that, Elder Shu also noticed that Saint Zara and Saint Vianna were actually trying to kill Zen through Johansson's deadly attacks. Your Grace, should I stop the competition now? Asked Elder Shu earnestly. Although it wasn't a good thing to stop the competition abruptly, this was necessary. No, Kenneth said. He refused directly, waving his hand, which startled Elder Shu. He then explained his reasons. Johansson is likely weaker than Zen. He probably won't succeed. Let's just wait and see. The fierce battle between Zen and Johansson in the battle ring still raged. Now that Zen's broken flying knife had made its debut, he didn't have to hide it anymore. Johansson was hiding in one of the shadows. It was a brilliant move, but the arena was only so big, and there were only 100 or so shadows in the arena. It was just a matter of time before Zen found the right one. Demonic Phantom. Zen shouted to summon his skill. 6 demonic phantoms answered his call, and he directed them to penetrate the shadows. The phantoms did so, one by one. If Johansson stayed hidden, one of them would definitely find him. At the same time, the broken flying knife in Zen's hand revolved around him madly. Every time the broken flying knife flew out, it would pierce a dozen shadows in an instant. By using both methods, Zen could force Johansson out of the shadow sooner or later. Just after Zen's phantoms had swept through a corner, his broken flying knife rushed towards the shadows ahead. Johansson jumped from a black shadow, his hiding place exposed. Once again, he brandished the snake-shaped sword in his hand, and rushed Zen. At the sight of the snake-shaped sword, Zen scoffed coldly and directed his broken flying knife to block the attack. Ding! The flying knife and the short sword collided, notching the snake sword. Both sides of the sword's blade had been cut, weakened. Another direct clash like that would make the sword completely destroyed. Johansson was experiencing a hardship, but he couldn't complain loudly. Now, he was chased around the ring, Zen's knife nicking him here, slashing his uniform there. He seemed to have performed worse than Zen's previous rivals. Yet, in fact, he was stronger than Vale and the other disciples, at least better than most personal disciples. Johansson was at least ranked in the top 5 disciples of Cloud Sect, possibly even higher. He was absolutely deadly with his 2 main tactics, defeating most of his foes easily. 6 months ago, Zen used a spiritual attack together with the broken flying knife and almost killed Vale. And now, Johansson, with the strength of illuminating Soul Realm, executed 2 powerful moves, and the results weren't hard to imagine. His 2 moves, however, were completely blocked by Zen. His spiritual attack not only failed to kill Zen, but instead, Zen took control of the situation. As for Johansson's short sword, well, it was just useless. He had no idea where Zen got his broken flying knife, but even the broken knife was 10 times more powerful than his sword. Johansson really couldn't figure out why he was in such pain now. As a result, he was desperate and wanted to give up. Moreover, he even had a hunch that if he didn't admit defeat now, Zen would probably kill him. Just after he was forced out, he again quickly ducked into another shadow. Meanwhile, as he was about to admit defeat, he heard a voice delivered secretly to him by Life Vitality. The voice gave him an order, and his expression changed all of a sudden. Chapter 264, A Way to Defeat Zen. It was Saint Zara who had spoken through his Life Vitality. Her original plan was to let Johansson pretend to kill Zen, unintentionally. An unintentional killing was likely to happen in the matches between the Kung Fu masters. With Johansson and Zen being both amazingly powerful, the first move must not falter. Otherwise, Zen could find an opportunity to fight back and defeat Johansson. Amidst a heated battle, it would be difficult for someone to stop mid-attack, especially when using full force. And with Johansson's sword that aimed to kill at first strike, unintentional killing would be a reasonable excuse for Zen's death in the battle ring. Saint Viana's plan would have been perfect, however, no one expected that Zen had concealed his real strength all this time. Johansson thought that his soul attack could defeat Zen, but instead, it was Zen's soul attack that caused the first much damage. Even his snake-shaped short sword was completely defeated by Zen's broken flying knife. How was it even possible? It was only then that they realized that Zen had concealed his real strength. And since Zen's strength was far beyond Johansson's, the unintentional killing plan had failed. Johansson felt Zen's killing intent. He would die if he wouldn't concede now. But Saint Zara told Johansson not to concede. Keep on fighting, Johansson. Johansson's face turned gloomy. How could Saint Zara expect Johansson to keep fighting with this crazy guy? Zen's broken flying knife alone had inflicted great damage to Johansson. What more could Zen's other attack do to him? Master, if I don't concede, I will die in Zen's hands. Johansson wailed through his Life Vitality. Zen was now breaking Johansson's shadow covering. It was only a matter of time before Zen could completely break the shadow covering, and by then, it would be too late for Johansson to escape. Don't worry, Johansson, I have another plan. I can control the magic array on the stage and form an attack to Zen using it. What you need to do is disguise it as your own and let others believe it is from you. I'm confident that we can kill Zen with just one hit. Saint Zara continued. Can you really do that? Aren't you afraid the other elders will discover our tricks? Hesitation was clouding Johansson's eyes as he saw Zen continuously destroying the shadows. There was indeed no absolute fairness in the All Peaks competition. Take for example what Tracy did. She had broken the rules of the competition but was not disqualified by the judge, because what she did was still tolerable by the elders. However, Saint Zara's idea was somewhat impractical because he wanted to take advantage of the magic array to kill Zen intentionally. If the elders found out, he would face grave consequences. Johansson wasn't sold in the idea, but he didn't know how to tell Saint Zara that he refused. His birthright as a member of the Shadow Group had greatly contributed to his present achievements. But the group had been living a miserable life since they were defeated, so when Cloud Sect learned that Johansson was a member of Shadow Group, he wasn't allowed to join the sect. But if it weren't for Saint Zara's support, he wouldn't have the chance to be a disciple of the sect. Moreover, he had become an inner disciple with Saint Zara's support. The kindness that Saint Zara extended to Johansson was the reason the latter couldn't refuse. Quit worrying, they won't notice. Besides, it doesn't matter if I kill Zen. There are many people who will be happy to see him dead. Perhaps no one wants to see him alive. Just get ready and do as I tell you. Saint Zara uttered again. Saint Zara wouldn't take the risk of this plan if it wasn't for Saint Vienna having his back. This was one risky step to take, but they were willing to do it. Johansson was about to convince his master not to do it, but before he could say anything, Saint Zara had already launched the attack. The stage of the All Peaks competition was surrounded by a huge magic array which provided various energies and enchanted barriers. Some of the enchanted barriers divided the whole stage into several parts, allowing more than a pair of competitors to battle at the same time. The most important function of the magic array was to keep everything in the stage to avoid hurting the audience with battle debris. But this wasn't clearly the only function of the magic array. As saints of Cloud Sect, Saint Zara and Saint Vienna knew how to deliver an attack to the stage through the magic array. Go to perdition, Zen. Saint Vienna created access through the magic array, and then Saint Zara launched his attack. All of a sudden, a vortex emerged beside Johansson. Since the black shadows covered them completely, everyone on the stage didn't notice it. At that moment, they were still in shock of Zen's counterattacks. But Zen perceived a strong power in the black shadows. Now what? Zen readied himself for anything that would come his way with the flying broken knife in his hand. His face had a trace of doubt in it. He started to feel fear by the presence of that unknown strong power. Is this Johansson's real strength? Was he just toying with me all this time and decided to show what he is really capable of? He wondered. This situation was becoming unfavorable for Zen. He felt danger all around him and his heart started to pound harder. Johansson had been hiding behind those black shadows for a long time. If he had such a powerful martial arts attack, why didn't he use it earlier? Zen couldn't comprehend how Johansson could possibly make this frightening attack. But there was no time to think as a purple light suddenly came out from the black shadows. The light rapidly hit Zen and its momentum almost stifled his breath. There was no way this strong power was from Johansson. Someone else was helping him. Was it Saint Zara or Saint Vienna? They were bold to dare play a trick in the All Peaks competition. They really had the nerve to break the rules of the competition. Wow, Johansson started to strike back. This attack is powerful. When did Johansson become this powerful? Was he just concealing his real strength all this time? He was just promoted into the illuminating soul realm. It's impossible for him to make such a powerful attack with his current level. The top disciples of Cloud Sect were also in their early stage of the illuminating soul realm. The early stage of the illuminating soul realm ranged from grade 1 to grade 3. Once the disciples reached grade 3 of the illuminating soul realm, the sect would choose the most talented disciples to join the Cloud Hall through various works. Those who didn't make it would choose to join the Burning Sky Empire to temper themselves through wars. Floyd, or also known as the Flying Dragon General, belonged to the second category. Since he was not qualified to enter the Cloud Hall, he chose to take part in the army instead. The most ordinary disciples, on the other hand, would be part of the sect staffs. With further cultivation, they could be promoted as hall chiefs, then saints, then elders, and then vice leader in the future. Johansson was only at the grade 2 of Illuminating Soul Realm, but the strike he just made contained the power equal to the ultimate grade of Illuminating Soul Realm. At the sight of the immense attack, the poker-faced judges showed signs of surprise and disbelief. All the genius disciples of each peak were shocked as well. They did not expect that Johansson could produce such a terrible blow. The question now was how could Zen defend himself this time? Zen was stressing out at this moment. If he had expected the attack, he would have summoned his demonic life vitality to devour those black shadows and strike back. However, it would be useless now. There was no way he could defend himself. In the Commandment Mount, Zen once blocked the attack of Saint Vienna just because he wasn't thinking clearly and just made random blows. Zen also considered that Saint Vienna didn't give his all because the first was just a junior-level disciple. There was no way a saint would waste his energy for a low-level disciple. But today was different. Saint Zara had been saving up his strength and intended to kill Zen with one hit. It would be impossible for Zen to block that attack from a master in the ultimate grade of the illuminating soul realm. But no matter what, he must defend himself. Zen's martial will was firmer than any other disciple's. Even if he suspected that someone was helping Johansson and he felt like a rabbit being chased by a lion, he was fearless and determined to win. Fear was just a useless emotion adopted by the weak to defend themselves from the shame of losing. Zen summoned the 6 demonic phantoms and formed a straight line to block the purple light. Crack, crack, crack. The powerful demonic phantoms were instantly penetrated by the purple light. It's no use. I can't handle this attack. With the demonic phantoms broken, Zen resorted to his flying broken knife. He threw it directly into the light. Whoosh! The sharp flying knife cut the powerful purple light into 2 parts. But it was still useless. The purple light was cut into 2 parts but continued to shoot toward Zen. Without any idea left, Zen chose to evade from the purple light. The audience was becoming anxious and worried about Zen. They held onto their seats tightly, trying to comprehend what was happening. Oh no, Zen can't withstand it. Johansson's desperate. Did he make the attack at the expense of his own life? If it's Johansson's real strength, he can become the champion of this year's All Peaks competition. After all, who can really defend and defeat Johansson's attack? Roche, Patrick, Tracy, Wing, none of them can. No one in this competition can block that attack. However, just when everyone thought that Zen would die from the attack, a huge roar sounded not from afar. How dare you! How dare you! The voice echoed through the valleys. It was like the snoring of an ancient beast from far away. Chapter 265, Punish the Saints. The growl pierced through the thin air and came loud and clear to everyone's ears. Hundreds of thousands of disciples, including the disciples who had received punishments at Mountain, and the inner disciples and outer disciples from the 33 peaks, felt the sound ringing in their ears at the same time. Who was that? Who made that horrible sound? It's coming from the foot of the mountain. But why is it still so loud after traveling all this way? Is it a human sound? At that moment, the faces of many outer disciples turned ghastly pale. In their mind, the person who could roar that loudly must be someone out of legend. The disciples from the 33 peaks were shocked into silence, and one could imagine how terrified the disciples around the arena were. But the sound grew ever louder. This time it reached critical mass. The force of it knocked many disciples and even some masters down to the ground. Only a few people could withstand it, like Roche, Wing, and a few personal disciples. But their faces were all pale. Obviously, it cost them much life vitality to resist the horrible sound wave. In fact, the sound wave was actually a form of highly condensed energy. 99% of the sound wave condensed into a bright yellow ripple, rushing directly into the arena and breaking the purple light into pieces. At the same time, Johansson, who hid in the black shadow, stumbled and fell out from his hiding place. He was near the bright yellow ripple, and it was a devastating attack. Right now, his face was as pale as a piece of white paper. After he fell, he spat a mouthful of blood. The sound wave was well aimed. It came precisely to its target without missing an inch. It suddenly disappeared after it smashed the purple light in front of Zen. Zen was also affected by the force emitted from the sound wave, but not that seriously. Obviously, the shout is meant to stop the contest. But who did that? That thing is incredibly strong. Zen thought. Shocked as Zen was, he felt fortunate that the sound wave wasn't aimed at him. If the sound wave just came at him, he would have been shredded by it. In a short while, a middle-aged man appeared out of thin air, at first transparent, then very real, floating in the air. It was the leader of the Cloud sect, Kenneth. He was followed by Elder Shu. It is probably the leader who roared that way. It's incredible. The roaring of the leader just saved Zen. But why did the leader help him? Is this the real strength of the leader? It's stunning. If he hadn't gathered the sound and focused it that way, everyone would have died from it. At this time, the referees and the several elders all pressed their hands together and bowed to Kenneth, Your Grace. Zen raised his head and looked at Kenneth. He stood there silently, myriad feelings beginning to stir in him. The supreme level of the martial arts is indeed powerful beyond imagining. But when can I reach the level of the leader? Zen wondered. Kenneth glanced at Zen casually and then he said seriously, Vienna, Zara, you old mongrels, come on out here. The disciples were all confused now. Vienna and Zara, was he referring to Saint Vienna and Saint Zara, two of the 10 great saints in the Cloud sect? Did the leader roar just because of them? Most of the disciples couldn't understand why the battle had anything to do with the 2 saints from the Cloud sect. Though the disciples of the Cloud sect couldn't figure out what was happening, some hall chiefs and the elders had already had a clue. The purple light released by Johansen just now was not really from him. It was undeniable that Johansen was a talent and rare to be seen in this century. With his family's help, he also had very good chances at a good career. But as a beginner of the illuminating soul realm, how could he possibly release such mighty power? In fact, at the moment the purple light appeared, several elders already saw that it was actually from Saint Zara. The elders were worldly wise and they all chose to keep silent to keep drama at a minimum. Although it violated the rules of the competition to cheat, Johansen was the personal disciple of Saint Zara, while Zen, he was only a talented warrior of humble birth. Who would take the risk to speak for a nobody? But they were wrong. They had held their positions for a long time, maybe too long. Those saints and elders had already forgotten the original reason why the Cloud sect was established. As the holy place for martial arts in the eastern region, the Cloud sect was not a place the saints and elders stood to profit or provided for their retirement. The purpose of the Cloud sect was to look for talented disciples across the entire eastern region and send them to the Cloud Hall. That was also the reason why Kenneth seldom handled the affairs in the Cloud sect. But he had to be present in the All Peaks competition that took place every 3 years. Because he needed to inspect the talents of the Cloud sect and send the most brilliant stars to the Cloud Hall. Zen, in his perception, was the most eye-catching pearl that he had met since he became the leader. He even had the hunch that if Zen was sent to the Cloud Hall where galaxy of talents from all regions gathered, his talent would eclipse everyone. Since the moment Kenneth noticed Zen's talent, he had kept watching every round that Zen joined with great interest. He had paid more attention to Zen than to those personal disciples who also displayed extraordinary talent. One of the reasons was that Zen came from a humble family. Kenneth himself was also from a humble background. He knew many of those personal disciples had all kinds of resources available when they started. While Zen's family had not much at all. He couldn't afford the best teachers, the fancy equipment. The only way he could have achieved as much as he did was through great talent. However, the pearl that Kenneth treasured was under fatal attack from the saints of the Cloud sect in full view of the public. It not only disgraced him, as he was the leader, more importantly, it had actually crossed the line. The faces of Saint Vienna and Saint Zara went ghastly pale. They stumbled towards Kenneth, their calm, sage-like manner abandoned. Seconds before, Saint Zara's fatal attack almost succeeded, and a smug smile already found its way to Saint Vienna's face. In Saint Vienna's eyes, Zen was a locust, a bug to be squashed, regardless of its skill at hopping around. No matter how much strength Zen hid inside himself, there was no way he could live through a fatal attack from Saint Zara. But just they were about to cheer, a roaring smashed the purple light from Saint Zara into pieces. The moment they heard the roaring, their hearts trembled vehemently. They realized that they were wrong, and they had made a big mistake. Yes, it was true that no one would take Zen's side, not the elders, saints or hall chiefs. They had no reason to act against Saint Zara and Saint Vienna in order to speak up for Zen. Moreover, they barely knew Zen, so it wouldn't do them any good to help him. But they both forgot Kenneth. Probably because Kenneth hadn't been around for a long time and he kept his hands out of the Cloud sect's affairs. That gave Saint Zara and Saint Vienna the false impression that they could control everything in the Cloud sect. And their misunderstanding led to their bold plan of killing Zen at the All Peaks competition. Your Grace. They cringed and bowed down to Kenneth. I don't know what gave you the nerve to do this. Did you suddenly become as stupid as dogs? Or you have already forgotten my existence? How dare you try to kill a contestant at the All Peaks competition? Kenneth scolded harshly. Oh, my goodness. It was not until they heard Kenneth's words that the disciples of the Cloud sect realized what had happened. It turned out that the purple light did not actually come from Johansen, but from Saint Zara and Saint Vienna. The 10 great saints were all at the supreme level of the illuminating soul realm, and the purple light was, of course, not something that Zen could resist. But what exactly had Zen done that offended these two saints? It seemed this was no longer important. The issue at hand was that Kenneth was extremely angry. Those two saints were too shameless. They dared to attack a young disciple in the arena. The other disciples were all indignant about this. But the atmosphere was tense around the arena, and the nervous tension had stretched across a board. No one dared discuss it. The disciples from the 33 Peaks were pretty mad to know this. Now the masters from the 33 Peaks brought the top disciples to attend the All Peaks competition. The rest, hundreds of thousands of disciples, already watched the scenes through the picture slab. All the disciples, including the outer disciples and inner disciples, bristled with rage and their eyes flamed with anger. What's going on here? Why would saints kill someone at the All Peaks competition? It is said that the Cloud sect has the strictest rules. I'm afraid that those rules are only applied to disciples like us. But the saints can do what they want. Punish them, the way you would punish a disciple. They can't get off scot-free, even if they are saints. They should be killed, killed, killed. The disciples of the 33 Peaks were all filled with immense chagrin. But as the venue for the competition was far from the 33 Peaks, no one possessed the ability to shout that far like Kenneth did. Your Grace, please let me explain. It is true that I did interfere in the battle. But I lost my head. It was Saint Vienna. He egged me on. Saint Zara was not a cruel man in his bone. He did hesitate before he took action. And it was Saint Vienna who pushed him to make up his mind. Zara, don't slander me. Johansson is your disciple, and you released the purple light to attack Zen. Why do you lay all this on me? Saint Vienna had no choice but try to keep himself clean from this matter. But as he spoke, he noticed the murderous look in Kenneth's eyes. He suddenly realized that Kenneth was about to kill them. They tried to assassinate a disciple in the fight during the All Peaks competition, under the watchful eyes of all the disciples of the Cloud sect. If no one got punished for this, the reputation of the Cloud sect would be greatly harmed. But what was the price for breaking the rules? The answer was obvious. Thinking of this, Saint Vienna suddenly flew into the air. He zoomed off into the distance. Compared to Saint Zara, who tended to slowly consider everything from every angle, Saint Vienna was a decisive and ruthless man. He knew that the only way he'd be able to stay was to face death. He figured if he could escape, maybe he'd stay alive. Seeing Saint Vienna fly away, Kenneth sneered. Then he raised his strong arm and suddenly thrust it into the air, aiming straight at the flying saint. Chapter 266, The Blood Condensation Pill. The blow dealt by Kenneth's hand disturbed the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. His fist let out a faint yellow light, which shot straight up into the sky, chasing the direction of Saint Vienna's escape. Everyone present had their eyes fixed on that light. With admirable cultivation base, he being at the illuminating soul realm, Saint Vienna made full use of his life vitality to escape at a super-fast speed. The speed was so astonishing that Saint Vienna quickly turned into a mere speck in the sky in a blink of an eye. As astonishing as Saint Vienna's speed was, it could never compare to the velocity of the light released from Kenneth's fist. This light seemed to travel through space before it hit the small speck in the sky in an instant. People with excellent vision watched in horror as the light struck Saint Vienna and instantly burst into pieces before finally falling towards the ground like a rain of blood. Long distance notwithstanding, Kenneth still managed to kill Saint Vienna with just a fist. The sight sent a chill up everyone's spine. Kenneth's power was beyond everyone's imagination. Rooted to the spot was Saint Zara. Seeing the tragic end of Saint Vienna stunned him. And his now ashen face showed how scared he was. In his fear, the idea of running away at that very moment crossed his mind. He thought that with their fast speed, they could run in different directions and there would be at least one person who could successfully escape and survive. But when he thought about the idea again, he considered it quite childish aside from being ridiculous. Kenneth's eyes bored into Saint Zara's as he uttered coldly, Zara, considering your great contribution to Cloud sect all these years, and you were only egged on by Vienna, I've decided to just punish you by ordering you to spend the rest of your life in Hell Mountain. While Saint Zara was at the peak of illuminating soul realm, he had to submit to a lifespan and, at most, there were only 30 or 40 years left for him to survive. He would be staying in Hell Mountain until the end of his life. But of course, it was better to be alive than dead. And there might be another chance to turn things around as long as he was still alive. So there was no question that he would accept the punishment and nodded, thanking Kenneth for sparing his life. After that, Kenneth turned to glance at Johansson, who lay motionless on the ground like a dead dog. Kenneth's roar left him unconscious. Shaking his head, he sighed. Kenneth didn't have to concern himself with people like Johansson. As it was, there were severe punishments in the Cloud Sect's Commandant Hall waiting for him. From Johansson's unmoving figure, his eyes fell on Zen. As Kenneth turned to look at him, Zen had a feeling that the man just looked right through him. But after a while, he heard Kenneth say, "You are not bad." Then he tossed Zen something small and black and said, "My roar may have injured you internally. Take this pill as it will benefit you a lot. I would like to see you put force in your power in the next competitions." Catching the black object, Zen looked at it closely. It was a pill. Examining its outer cover, he saw nothing special about it. Once he had said the words, Kenneth left the field, flying back to his seat without a backward glance. Just then, Elder Shu went up to Zen and in a kind tone said, "Take the pill. It's a blood condensation pill that not only heals all internal injuries, but is also good for your pneuma and blood." The truth was Zen was not hurt by Kenneth's roar. Like everyone present, Zen was affected by the tremendous force of Kenneth's roar. However, his body was not easily hurt and didn't suffer that way. Judging by Shu's tone, he thought the pill must be very precious. Besides, how could he refuse a favor from the leader? What Zen didn't know was how much Shu, and everyone who understood how valuable the pill was, envied him. While the blood condensation pill was used to heal internal injuries, this was only an extra function. Its most crucial effect was to increase pneuma and blood. The impact of pneuma and blood on people couldn't be stressed enough. Having high amounts of both components could help someone quickly recover after injury. On the other hand, a lack of pneuma and blood would result in excruciating pain during a long illness which might be caused even by a small wound. Aside from having an effect on the speed of wound healing, enough pneuma and blood played an indispensable role in endurance and physical strength. The winner is Zen of Drizzle Peak. The personal disciple Johansson is defeated, the referee announced. After the result of the competition was made known, 2 stewards went out to the field and carried Johansson away. After witnessing Zen's excellent performance in the competition, the disciples of Cloud Sect had a clearer impression of the young Luo's strength. Before meeting Johansson, people thought there was a chance for Zen to enter the top 10 since he was not expected to beat the personal disciple, who was anticipated to be in the top 5. No one certainly expected Johansson to be completely overpowered by Zen in assassination, which was the personal disciple's specialization. The power of the young Luo had become unfathomable in the disciples' eyes. Still, what was most important for Zen was Kenneth's earlier comment about him. "You are not bad." Kenneth was the leader of Cloud Sect and considered a divine figure of the eastern region. There once was an emperor of the Burning Sky Empire named Cain, who was stronger than Kenneth. But since his disappearance, Kenneth became the number 1 in the eastern region. Hearing the number 1 in the region say, "Not bad," undoubtedly was a great honor for Zen. With Zen earning high praise from Kenneth, who would dare look down upon him? Despite Kenneth's praise, it was not enough for people to believe Zen could take the first place in the All Peaks competition. However, it was undeniable that Zen was not a weak person, and the disciples had to admit this, including the fact that he was strong enough to be among the top-ranked disciples of Cloud Sect. After the intermezzo, the competition resumed and Zen returned to the base of Drizzle Peak. The ones most worried about Zen's safety were of course Master Wen and the Drizzle Peak disciples. All they could do was stand by helplessly, unable to help Zen in his match. After all, the leader and saints were present, thus preventing them from speaking a word in front of them. Everyone held their breath until they saw Zen land on his feet safely. Upon his return, they were just as filled with envy seeing the pill given by the leader to Zen. Although they had no idea what the blood condensation pill was, since it came from the leader, they knew it must be a rare treasure. Finally, Zen sat down and took the pill. The blood condensation pill had a unique taste and instantly melted in the mouth. It released a strong smell of blood, and Zen almost felt that he was not taking a pill, but sucking fresh blood. After several minutes, Zen could feel the blood pulsing through his body and his face burning and turning red. The rush of blood flow was twice as fast as normal. It was the blood condensation pill in action. As previously explained, it was expected to increase pneuma and blood. The rapid flow of blood was good for the body, and the faster it flowed, the more distinctive the promotion. With the pill's effects released to the maximum extent, Zen could feel the blood burning in his vessels. Rather than discomfort, Zen felt himself full of energy. He smiled as he took a deep breath of satisfaction. While Zen was meditating and absorbing the pill, the competition continued in high gear. For the other disciples, Zen's assassination by saints was only an episode in the All Peaks competition. They understood that what was most important was getting a good result in the competition. As the round-robin competition went underway and reached the later stages, the fighting in the field was getting more and more intense. All the disciples of the 33 peaks were making desperate efforts to push their final ranking. In cases where they were matched up with a top disciple from the other peaks or a personal disciple whose skill was far above their own, most would simply throw in the towel to preserve their strength for the next round of fighting. If they came up against a well-matched adversary, they spared no effort to fight and win. These were often fierce matches where they had to bring out all their potential. After another 7 or 8 rounds of round-robin competition, it was again Zen's turn to fight, after the drawing of lots. When the referee saw Zen still seated on the ground and meditating, he assumed the fighter was still absorbing the pill and didn't know whether to interrupt him or not. The pill from the leader was very precious. It would be a sin to waste even just a little of it. So, he announced, Zen has not finished absorbing the pill. We will put off the match. Right after the announcement, Zen suddenly opened his eyes and said aloud, no. There is no need to break the rule for me. Zen's pronouncement threw the referee in a dilemma. He worried that it might upset Kenneth if he allowed Zen to continue. Although he was not directly under Kenneth's power, just one order from the leader could get him in trouble. But, the referee hesitated, and left the sentence unfinished. I have completely absorbed the pill. It was nothing serious and I can go on, Zen said seriously. He stared at the referee to show he was ready. Taking a deep breath, the referee stopped arguing after Zen's declaration. He felt a sense of relief and a smile spread across his face. Then please head on to the field, he instructed Zen. Just as Zen stepped onto the field, the man at the other end of the field called out, I give up. The man who declared himself defeated was Jose's own son. As a personal disciple, he was one of the top disciples of Daylily Peak and was of no ordinary talent. He had straight victories except for one loss to Wing. Everyone was stunned to see Jose concede defeat to Zen. Personal disciples always beat ordinary disciples. No one had ever witnessed a personal disciple throw in the towel without a fight. This year's All Peaks competition had indeed changed the logic of the disciples. Or perhaps it could be said that the performances of ordinary disciples were simply astounding. Aside from Zen, Roche was also a dark horse in the All Peaks competition this year. He had defeated 2 personal disciples in succession without even using his sword. It had been incredible. In addition to Zen and Roche, Wing and Sheeny also defeated several personal disciples. People were shocked when Jose admitted defeat before even facing Zen. In their view, he had the potential to be in the top 10. However, it was his bad luck to meet Zen, whose spectacular performance impressed everyone. And it took everyone by surprise to see that Zen was also a master of soul attack. Even Johansson, who had trained his soul intensely, could not withstand Zen's soul attack, let alone Jose. It was extremely difficult to practice the soul, and most martial artists never got the chance to even reach that level. In the several rounds that ensued, when people faced Zen, no sooner had the competition started than most would toss their hands in defeat. So, Zen just moved from the field to his seat without actually fighting. Tracy had become very depressed. After several rounds of drawing lots, she still hadn't met Zen. She already harbored thoughts of having someone play a trick in the drawing of lots to arrange it, so she and Zen ended up in the same group. After that incident, even a fool could see that Johansson versus Zen was not just spontaneous. The 2 saints had designed the entire thing to kill Zen. At this point, even she was in a special position in Cloud Sect, no one dared to help her cheat in the lot drawing. Each time when it was her turn to draw lots, she would murmur his name, again and again, hoping to get Zen to be her opponent. But the results of the competition raised her hopes repeatedly. Chapter 267, Samsara of Buddhism. Still feeling very upset, Tracy heard the referee announce, next Wing of Skytop Peak will fight the personal disciple, Patrick. Making a face at Patrick, Tracy gestured at him. Patrick, it's your turn. After giving her a gentle smile in return, he made his way toward the battle ring. Among the personal disciples, Patrick seemed like a special one. Instead of the usual aggressive attitude the others showed, he always appeared friendly and seldom had any disputes with anyone. With this kind of behavior, it was difficult to know his true competence. Even so, it was common knowledge that he was rather capable since he ranked second in the Cloud Sect list. The one who ranked first in the list, Evan Lee, was still practicing his cultivation in a secluded place, so, in this round robin, his name wasn't included in the draw lot box. If Evan didn't show up before the competition ended, then Patrick would be the most powerful participant in this session of the All Peaks competition. All the top 10 disciples in the Cloud sect list were very powerful. These talents improved remarkably fast in daily cultivation, and none of them was overconfident about winning against each other if they had to battle. When it was Patrick's turn to compete, the personal disciples perked up and cheered because so far, the personal disciples' performance in the competition was uncharacteristically poor. In the former All Peaks competitions, they had always been highly regarded, so it would be a shame if none of them could turn the table for this one. Their previous achievements were nothing short of brilliant. In one of the former All Peaks competitions, the top 20 spots were all filled in by personal disciples. This time, it seemed unlikely for them to achieve such success because many of the personal disciples had already been defeated by the disciples of the 33 peaks in the competition. Often condescending in attitude, the personal disciples were frustrated with the huge difference from previous competitions. One could imagine how frustrated they must have felt, so they were eager to find a leading personal disciple that could redeem them. Patrick was the most suitable person for the job. Patrick, crack down that wing guy. We believe in you. You'll win back honor for his personal disciples. In the previous competitions, not a soul would have expected to hear such words come out of the crowd of personal disciples, as they seemed to be above such things. Because of how things were turning out, their attitudes seemed to shift. Never would they have expected to see so many powerful disciples among the 33 peaks. Patrick's opponent, Wing, stepped into the battle ring with a machete in his hand. Having won several rounds in a row, he looked rather refreshed. Looking at Patrick, he said, "I've been waiting for the battle between us for a long time." Really? Still maintaining his gentle and friendly demeanor, Patrick offered a smile. "Since Evan isn't here, I'll be glad to compete with you. If I win, all of the 33 peaks will see that the personal disciples are nothing special." Although Wing was smiling, he wasn't doing it because he had Patrick's friendly nature. 3 years ago, Wing had been defeated by several personal disciples in the competitions, driving him to practice cultivation hard since then. Now, it was time for him to redeem his dignity in the All Peaks competition. Seemingly agreeing with Wing, Patrick merely shrugged. "I don't think we're all that special either." With a shake of his head, Wing carelessly circled his machete in the air. "You personal disciples are just arrogant from the bottom of your hearts. Just because you said it doesn't mean you really think that way. But it doesn't matter. I will convince you completely," Wing continued. Hearing that, Patrick nodded once again and stretched out 3 of his fingers. "You're right, maybe we are still a little arrogant deep down. This arrogance tells me I can defeat you with 3 moves. The crowd started reacting. 3 moves? I know Patrick is powerful, but I don't think he can defeat Wing with just 3 moves. He must be boasting. Impossible. Wing has just won several rounds against personal disciples in the competition, so they should be a matched pair. It's too early to tell who will win. I don't believe Patrick can defeat Wing in 3 moves. HMPH. What's the big deal about being second on the list? To defeat Wing in 3 moves. How arrogant these personal disciples are. Patrick's asking to be humiliated if he can't defeat Wing in 3 moves. The disciples of the 33 peaks always challenged each other when they were in their own peaks and wouldn't dream of admitting they were less powerful than those of another peak. However, in the face of personal disciples, they would unite to fight against the outsiders. As he heard Patrick, Wing burst into laughter and snorted. "Well, since you're so confident about yourself, show me how incredible those 3 moves are." With that, Wing gripped his machete and rushed toward Patrick. The machete Wing wielded was a high-grade spiritual weapon. However, it was rather special because of the 2 crystals embedded into the blade. Generally, a high-grade spiritual weapon embedded with a single crystal would be considered a low-grade fairy weapon. It was much more difficult to embed 2 crystals into the blade, so Wing's machete should be similar to that of a middle-grade fairy weapon. Heavenly powerful machete, triple waves. As Wing shouted out his attack, an aggressive aura radiated from him. With a sudden wave of his machete, 3 shots of sharp cutter energy rushed towards Patrick like waves of the sea. These waves could attack him thrice, with each of the attacks' impact dramatically increasing. The power of the first wave was terrifying enough, so one could imagine how incredible the doubled power of the second wave and the further doubled power of the third wave would be. According to the TIER4 cultivation method, heavenly powerful machete, practitioners could actually summon 4 or even 5 waves. Moreover, each additional wave did more than just double the previous attack power. 3 waves would attack 6 times and 4 waves would attack 10 times. With Wing's current capabilities, he could only summon 3 waves. Still, it was enough for him to defeat most of his opponents in the competition. In the face of such a strong attack, Patrick remained his calm smile without a hint of worry on his face. As the outrageous cutter energy came close, a shadow of a huge bell appeared from behind Patrick. Clang, 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 clang. When the 3 waves collided with the impenetrable defense formed by the bell, 6 clear and melodious sounds echoed in the battle ring. Everyone had life vitality to protect themselves, however, it took great skill and mastery to shape it the way Patrick had as he transformed his life vitality into an impenetrable defense. He might have been the only person able to transform his life vitality into an impenetrable defense. With that, he was able to fend off the attacks from powerful practitioners, such as Wing. Since I used this impenetrable defense, one of my moves is considered done. I've got 2 left, now, Patrick said, still so composed for someone in the middle of a fight. Wing's face darkened as he saw that Patrick wasn't taking him seriously. Counting even the defense move when Patrick should only be counting attack moves showed that he believed he could easily beat Wing in only 2 moves. As the best disciple of Skytop Peak, Wing couldn't bear the humiliation. Since you're talking so big, I'm going to force you to defend yourself. You'll shut up after 3 defenses. Heavenly powerful machete, shattering chop. With that command, the machete in his hand immediately turned into hundreds of gray cutter shadows, almost enough to wrap around Patrick completely. Clang, 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 a string of bell rings filled the arena once again. Patrick's defense was indeed impenetrable. You've used your defense twice. Now, you only have 1 move left, right? Wing asked deliberately. With a nod and a serious expression, Patrick simply answered, yes, I only have 1 move left. The fact had Wing arch an eyebrow and wave his machete back at Patrick once again. Then show me how you can beat me with 1 move. It was clear that Patrick couldn't defend against Wing's 3rd attack. With only 1 move left, he could choose to either attack or defend. Wing's machete was destructive. Although he failed to break Patrick's impenetrable defense twice, if anyone else had dared to resist his machete, they would have been chopped to pieces by now. Show me what you'll do. Heavenly powerful machete, sheer a chop. For the 3rd time, Wing shouted his move and waved his machete toward Patrick. The sheer a chop was the most powerful cutting method Wing had learned. Its blade intent was undoubtedly remarkable. Compared to sword intent, blade intent was blunter but more powerful. Like a powerful king with years of battle experience in the field, Wing waved his machete with a domineering aura. Just then, Patrick used his last move. It was the only attack move he needed. Samsara of Buddhism, Chapter 268, 1 move. The Buddhist cultivation method was a class of its own. Despite being low-key and mysterious, it had its own strong power. Since there wasn't any book about the Buddhist cultivation method even in the heavenly library of Cloud Sect, nobody knew where Patrick learned these Buddhist cultivation methods. Patrick said he would use 3 moves, but it was only 1 move. He resisted Wing twice with the impenetrable defense made from his life vitality. The move he was about to use for counterattack was called the Samsara of Buddhism. The Samsara in Buddhism was described as the ultimate destination of a dead person's soul. The soul of a dead person wouldn't just disappear but would be sent to any of the 6 realms of existence, namely 3 good realms, heavenly, demigod, human, and 3 evil realms, animal, ghosts, unpleasant. At the moment, 6 small golden balls were suddenly beside Patrick. These small balls were bright gold on the surface with different characters engraved on each representing the 6 realms. Patrick hadn't cultivated enough, so the small balls were in such a state. If he was able to achieve a higher level of the samsara of Buddhism from his cultivation, there would be 6 different small worlds within the balls like the space in the space ring. However, there was no living thing in the space ring, while the 6 small balls had real worlds in them. If these small balls could create 6 worlds, Patrick's strength would be so unimaginably powerful. Even Kenneth would probably be killed in seconds. As soon as they appeared, the small balls started to spin rapidly that they formed a whirlpool in front of Patrick. Patrick's cultivation method looked nothing special. After he summoned the samsara of Buddhism, only a gentle and ordinary whirlpool appeared. But this was the nature of the Buddhist cultivation. It looked gentle and common, but nobody would dare to deny its strong power. Put on an air. Break it. Wing waved his treasured machete and tried to shatter it. The Shira chop was Wing's strongest attack, but he never used it in his previous matches because the opponents didn't deserve it. Wing might be arrogant, but he was no fool to turn a blind eye to Patrick's powerful might. Patrick didn't become the second best in Cloud Sect for nothing. So Wing exerted all his strength. Even a lion would use all its strength to capture its prey. And since Patrick was stronger than Wing, the latter must not falter at all cost. Wing congealed the cutter intent into a much stronger grey cutter light which was stronger than that made from the life vitality. When Wing finished cultivating this move, he had used it to cut a 200-foot high mount. He cut through the whole mount with the Shira chop once. The machete was one of the top weapons. The warrior cultivating to the extreme could even split the mountain and ground effortlessly. As soon as the fierce cutter energy appeared, the air around the arena moved rapidly and howled sharply as if unable to bear the overbearing cutter energy. Whoosh! The cutter energy suddenly rushed into Patrick's 6 whirlpools. The outermost layer of the whirlpools was instantly cut into pieces as soon as the cutter intent touched it. Like splitting bamboo, the cutter intent chopped Patrick's gentle whirlpools layer after layer. Seeing that his machete was successfully cutting through Patrick's whirlpools, Wing sneered, "Let's see how well you can resist it." Wing could smell his victory over Patrick. With his position in the Cloud Sect, Patrick would naturally keep his promise. Wing didn't have the confidence that he could keep on fighting Patrick if the latter wouldn't surrender after the 3-move covenant. But the smile on Wing's face gradually faded. As his Shira chop went deeper, it gradually slowed down until it couldn't penetrate anymore and eventually stopped. What is happening? How could he stop my blade? Fear brushed onto Wing's face when Patrick just easily grabbed his cutter intent. Patrick remained expressionless as he stretched his hand to direct the whirlpool into a different direction at high speed. The Shira chop stuck in the whirlpool spun without a stop until... Boo! A violent shock appeared in the air, and the Shira chop flew backward to Wing. Is this my own Shupra chop? But why is it trying to attack me? No, this is more powerful than my Shira chop. Patrick. Nobody knew more about the power of the Shira chop than Wing, but he found out that the Shira chop in the whirlpool was more powerful and horrifying than the one he released. Retreat. Wing knew that there was no way he could defeat the opponent, so he chose to retreat. But his speed wasn't enough to avoid the Shira chop. In the blink of an eye, the Shira chop was already in front of him. Wing couldn't dodge it anymore, so he just blocked with his treasured machete in front of him. Bang! Although Wing's treasured machete blocked most of the cutter intent, the strong cutter intent spread and tore Wing's robe into pieces. Despite the force he applied, Wing was still knocked back into the light curtain of the enchanted barrier and slowly slid down. Wing's robe was cut into rags and he had suffered injuries so deep that his bones were exposed. Wing leaned against the light curtain of the enchanted barrier, staring blankly at nowhere. He was depressed. He was ready to be defeated, but he didn't expect to lose with a grievance being defeated by his own most powerful attack move. And the power of the Shira chop from Patrick's weird whirlpool had doubled. 3 moves are more than enough to defeat you. Patrick glanced at Wing indifferently and then turned to leave. The disciples of the 33 Peaks were silent after watching the battle. So far, the top disciples from the 33 Peaks had been performing their best this year: Zen, Wing, Rocher, and Shini to name a few. The famous top disciples who weren't taught personally by masters did better than the conceited personal disciples. This fact made the inner and outer disciples of the 33 Peaks proud. So, it didn't matter if they were from poor families because they could still defeat the personal disciples with their perseverance. But then there was Patrick. He showed up on the competition to teach the disciples a lesson. That even such a genius top disciple like Wing from Skytop Peak would be defeated with only 3 moves. No, it was just 1 move. From the beginning of the competition to the end, Patrick only attacked once, but Wing had lost the capacity to fight. This brought back the fact that the personal disciples were terrifying and powerful. Patrick, you are awesome. Patrick, you didn't use 3 moves. You just resisted Wing twice and used his own move against him. That's right, Patrick could defeat these disciples from the 33 Peaks with only a half move. Now, let's see how these disciples will react. Patrick is not even the top best personal disciple. And the top best disciple, Evan, is still staying secluded for now. If he shows up, he will defeat all the disciples of the 33 Peaks. It's a dream to defeat the personal disciples. Maybe in the next life, they will have the chance. To be frank, the personal disciples didn't have a good performance in the All Peaks competition this year because many of them were defeated by the disciples from the 33 Peaks. For example, 3 personal disciples were defeated by Wing, while 2 personal disciples were nosed out by Shini, and Zen won over too many of them. The personal disciples were losing their faces. They were known to be more powerful than the disciples from the 33 Peaks in all aspects. They were the cream of the crop in Cloud sect. So when personal disciples started losing to the disciples from the 33 peaks, the group of the personal disciples felt embarrassed. Fortunately, Patrick avenged them and proved that the personal disciples were unbeatable. They once again became bold and elated. Why are you shouting? You only have Patrick, while we have Rocher, Zen, and other geniuses. We have a shot in winning the All Peaks competition this year. Some of the disciples from the 33 peaks retorted upon hearing the satire remarks from the personal disciples. Zen, the disciple at the second grade of the nature level. Rocher, the one at the consummation of nature level. Don't be silly, you just have these two disciples, but neither of them is a match for Patrick. You really can't stop daydreaming, can you? The personal disciples answered back sarcastically. The disciples from the 33 peaks and personal disciples started to taunt each other and then flung abuses. The Cloud sect elders and the referees didn't stop the commotion. Any warrior mustn't lack the warm blood. The whole Cloud sect was like a cage of crickets and they let the disciples fight against each other in it. The last one standing would be cultivated to be more talented and powerful than others. Only the human was not cricket. The fight in Cloud sect was not to kill limitlessly. They set reasonable rules to inspire the warm blood of the disciples and let them develop their greatest talent. The quarrels and abuses got more tense. When they were about to fight, two elders coming from above released two violent powers that frightened all the disciples. That's enough. Your strength can't be proven with your mouth, but only by fighting in the arena. The fight among the audience finally ceased. But both the personal disciples and 33 peaks disciples wanted to get their pride in the next rounds. The referee finally announced the next round, Zen from Drizzle Peak versus the personal disciple Tracy. Chapter 269, The Legendary Beast Blue Phoenix. Hearing the referee announce the next match, Tracy flashed a smile. Standing on the battle ring, she looked at Zen with her pretty eyes and said in a happy tone, "After I've waited for so long, the moment finally came. Zen, I can't say that this is your lucky day. I suppose you cannot run away anymore." Zen looked at Tracy with a slight smile and said indifferently, "To be honest, unlike you, I'm not looking forward to this fight at all." "Why?" asked Tracy, pouting her lips. "Because I don't know what I'll do if I win," Zen said flatly. Tracy had challenged Zen and said the losing party would be punished at the discretion of the winning party. "Are you sure you can beat me?" Tracy asked boldly, raising her fine eyebrows gently. "I guess so," Zen said lightly and nodded rather positively. "All right, I just planned to give you a little punishment, but now I have changed my mind. Once I defeat you, you'll be my horse and I will ride you whenever I want. You bend your knees and arms like a real live horse," she said without the slightest intention of joking. After that, Tracy raised her slender fingers to her head and took two ame pricks from her hair. The two 1-foot-long ame pricks were her hair ornaments when not used as weapons. "Ah, that's a risky gamble and the stake is just too high. How could she ask Zen to be her horse?" one disciple complained. "She is really going too far. If Zen loses to her, he has to listen to her every order." Another disciple added with full of concern for Zen. But since every disciple had seen what Tracy had done to Bass, no one dared to provoke her. Nobody would know what would happen when they irritated the little demon. She would completely disregard the rules of the competition and just punished everyone to her liking. "I agree, but only if you can really beat me," Zen replied shortly. "Very well, it seems that you still look down on me," Tracy said, slightly pouting her lips. "Then you are bound to regret." She exercised her skills and turned the two ame pricks in her hand into two blue-gray sharp shadows rushing towards Zen. In her previous matches, Tracy had already shown her remarkable speed. Many disciples of the Cloud sect were astonished about it and regarded it as total perfection. Just as the two sharp shadows were about to pierce through Zen's body, he easily avoided them by a gentle movement of his feet. Tracy surely went all out in this match. Patrick once commented that if Tracy's talent ranked the second place among the disciples in Cloud sect, then he thought no one would dare to rank the first place. Although Tracy's talent was second to none, unfortunately, she did not like to practice persistently. She would practice her skills for a few days and then do stuff that was just a waste of her talent for the other days. Despite having less time to practice, she still had amazing strength and power. "Feather pricks," Tracy shouted as she exercised her special skill. With her own special skills, Tracy created several ghost shadows. Once the speed of anything, whether it was human or other objects, reached ultra high, the ghost shadows would occur. Zen could also produce his own ghost shadows. But Tracis ghost shadows were particularly special because they were not just shadows, but the replica of Tracy with the same strength. Well, Zen said lightly as his eyes slightly narrowed. Sooner, dozens of ghost shadows surrounded Zen. Each of them replicated Tracis movements and each was holding an ame prick as they fired sharp blue-gray shadow attacks toward Zen. Tracis' approach was somewhat like Johansson's, except that Johansson's shadows could only hide his real body, while Tracis could launch an attack. But Tracy didn't have Johansson's brilliant hiding skills, and with Zen's magnificent spirit-sensing power, he could tell Tracis' location in a blink of an eye. Although Tracis' dozens of ghost shadows were launching more than 100 sharp blue-gray shadow attacks against Zen, he just ignored most of the attacks, kept holding his broken flying knife and constantly waved on his side to block the flank attacks. Ding, 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 came the sound of the collision. With the broken flying knife in his hand, he blocked hundreds of blue-gray shadow attacks in a short time. The attacks launched by the ghost shadows were just phantoms that didn't do any harm to Zen even though they pierced through his body. Seeing that Zen was able to dodge her attacks with his tiny flying knife, Tracy suddenly changed her fighting strategy. Now instead of surrounding Zen, she chose close combat. The two disciples used short weapons. Tracis' ame pricks were sharp, but Zen's reaction was quick. They had launched millions of attacks against each other instantly. They were moving too fast that the audience could only see their shadows and hear their weapons colliding. Your attack is really not effective to me. And with that level, I can defeat you in an instant, said Zen confidently. His defense was effective considering that he was only using his broken flying knife. His strength was also considerably greater compared to his opponent. Tracy knew that he was right. She could feel that Zen's power was beyond hers. Zen could block her attacks by gently moving from side to side, while her body was starting to numb. Starting to slow down her attacks, she stared at Zen with her pouted lips and said, I guess you're right. Maybe it's time to use my trump card. Patrick, who was sitting with the audience, suddenly stood up when he heard what Tracy said. No matter how stable and calm his character was, he could no longer remain cool. He persuaded earnestly, Tracy, it's just a fight. There's no need to use that. Patrick knew that if Tracy was forced to use that move, even he could not defeat her. But once that move was activated, it would have a great impact on Tracis' physical condition. But he left me no choice. If I don't use that move, I'm going to lose to him. Tracy said, with a trace of grievance on her face. Apparently, she was extremely unwilling to lose. You know that you're not as powerful as him, so you will lose one way or the other. It's just one match. Losing this one will not affect any of your standings. Tracy, if you feel you can't win, just admit defeat now. I'm sure Zen won't mind. Zen, do you agree with me? Said Patrick seriously. Zen smiled and said, absolutely. I won't punish Tracy or do anything embarrassing to her. Tracy shut her lips tight and was still a little reluctant to give up. Just as Zen and Patrick thought that Tracy was ready to admit defeat, she suddenly said, no. I won't return the same favor if I defeat you. After that, the two ame pricks in Tracis' hand twirled lightly and rushed towards her temples. The ame pricks pricked the acupuncture point in her temples, then another 16 acupuncture points in her arms, calf, and neck, leaving red dots all over her body. This process happened so fast that Patrick hardly had any time to stop her. He had no way but to heave a deep sigh. As he had expected, it would never be that easy to dissuade the unruly Tracy. Now, Zen would meet a horrible opponent. After the 16 acupoints were punctured, Tracis' momentum changed rapidly. The audience could clearly see the life vitality mingled with blood emitting from the 16 acupoints and continuously condensed behind Tracy. The body of Blue Phoenix activated. Tracy said. Tracis' voice was changed from her original naughty and lovely tone to current supremely majestic tone. Blue Phoenix. Is this what I think it is? The legendary beast Blue Phoenix. Why does Tracy have the body of Blue Phoenix? Is she actually a legendary beast? One disciple exclaimed doubtfully. Blue Phoenix is such a noble legendary beast. How did it become a disciple of Cloud Sect? I guess she was born with Blue Phoenix blood in her body. Another disciple analyzed carefully. I used to think that Tracis' strength is not very strong, probably only a little stronger than Jill and weaker than Wing, Sheeny and other similarly powerful disciples. But I did not expect that she was born with the blood of the legendary beast. With that blood running through her veins, I don't think any disciple could compare to her. Another disciple commented excitedly. The Cloud Sect disciples had all heard about all sorts of legends about the legendary beasts. But none of them had seen any of them. And now that the personal disciple Tracy had the blood of the legendary beast Blue Phoenix, it was a mind-blowing revelation for everyone. According to the legends, the strongest super-legendary beasts belong to the 4 major races: Cyan Dragon, Crimson Rosefinch, White Tiger, and Black Tortoise. The other less powerful super-legendary beasts were the Rock, Blue Phoenix, the 9-colored deer, and so on. As the blood boiled inside Tracy, she was gradually emitting more life vitality that slowly condensed and transformed into a faint shadow of Blue Phoenix. The Blue Phoenix shadow was faint, but it exuded a strong sense of power. Even the elders who were maintaining the order of the competition showed caution on their faces. Although they could sense no threats with Tracy's current strength, the sight of the legendary beast impressed them. "I don't know why, but I hate you. I hate your look and your behaviors, so I must teach you a good lesson," said Tracy arrogantly. At the moment, her momentum had completely changed. From her evil and righteous character, she turned into a noble and superior goddess. Zen was a little speechless at the sight of the changed Tracy. Judging from Patrick's tone, it seemed that Tracy couldn't activate the body of Blue Phoenix at will. He also had no clue as to when and where he had irritated the little girl that resulted to this. Originally, he thought it would be easy to win this match, but he absolutely did not expect that Tracy had a hidden trump card. After her transformation, her presence was dominating that it almost suffocated Zen. "It looks like it's time to take things seriously," Zen thought to himself as he took his streamer sword out of his space ring. Zen had planned to use the sword only when fighting with Roche or Patrick. Yet, in the face of the transformed Tracy, Zen had no choice but to use it because he knew that if he continued to hide strength, he was most likely to be defeated by Tracy. Chapter 270. Who will win this round? Tracy stood elegantly at the center of the competition field. The shadow of the Blue Phoenix behind her looked indistinct and blurry, yet it radiated an overwhelming aura. Tracy looked like a sacred goddess that everyone couldn't look at her graceful figure directly. The audience was left in awe by the dramatic change in the competition field. It was a mind-blowing fact that one of the disciples of Cloud Sect among them could have the power of a legendary beast. To everyone's mind, it would be nearly impossible for Zen to beat Tracy now that she had used the power of the Blue Phoenix. They were expecting that Zen would do the best thing, to admit defeat. But to their surprise, Zen took out his sword instead. A sword? Does Zen have a sword? But he is a body refiner, so how could he use a sword? I don't know what to believe now. I agree, I don't know when Zen has become a sword practitioner. Other than that, it looks to me that he is carrying a fairy weapon. What the heck, does this mean that Zen has never shown his real strength in his previous matches? So, neither his flying knife nor his soul attack was his real ace. I can't wait to see what his real trump card is. The audience had not yet recovered from the shocking fact that Tracy had the power of the Blue Phoenix, and now they were yet again treated to another revelation. Zen, who was only in grade 2 nature level, had astonished the audience by consecutively defeating rivals of nature level consummation, illuminating Soul Realm, and those personal disciples. And yet he still had some new tricks to show. Zen had instantly become an unfathomable figure in everyone's eyes. His mysterious image was a result of his endless powerful means of fighting. After he employed many different skills to beat his rivals, the audience became unclear about the limit of his real power or whether it had a limit or not. When the audience saw Tracy's Blue Phoenix, they thought that Zen would be defeated this time. However, when Zen pulled out his sword, the result of the fight became uncertain again. They are really amazing, many disciples thought to themselves. Most of them would never be able to reach the same level as the ones in the competition field right now. Among the audience, Roche quietly watched the match on the stage. His sharp gaze fixed on Zen, who was holding a sword in his hand, and his eyes were filled with eagerness to fight. Roche and Zen had something in common. They were both a dark horse in this All Peaks competition. Both were skip-level challengers, although Zen did it better by defeating an illuminating Soul Realm practitioner, while Roche performed just as expected with his level at nature level consummation. But it didn't necessarily mean that Zen was far more powerful than Roche. The latter was a sword practitioner, but he hadn't used his sword in front of any of his rivals yet, which made him as unfathomable as Zen. Roche was interested in Zen after he saw the latter's sword step. He was eager to fight Zen, but it was a pity that they hadn't encountered each other in the round-robin match. The moment Zen took out his sword, he understood it wasn't luck that brought the sword step into Zen's hands. Zen was also a sword practitioner, and he must have understood the sword intent as well. It was almost impossible for a sword practitioner to master the sword step overnight despite the deep of the sword intent. Rocher was quite certain about that because he had spent 3 months learning the sword step. But as for Zen, he had managed to grasp the sword step just after he saw Rocher use it in the competition. Rocher was proud of his own talent, but he had to admit that Zen was an exceptional one. I believe that we'll eventually meet in this All Peaks competition. I'm looking forward to it, Zen Luo. Rocher thought to himself as he took a deep breath. Standing on the high platform and watching the fight below, Kenneth smiled and said, Tracy is indeed a willful girl. The power of the Blue Phoenix will consume most of her energy, but she still chose to use it in this competition. She's overdoing it, but it's somewhat a good thing. She manages to force Zen to show another skill. I didn't expect that he is able to use a sword. Go ahead, boy, show me how proficient you are with your sword intent. Elder Shu stood there dumbfounded as he watched the unexpected development in the competition field. He eventually said, well, it's the age of the young generation now. It's gratifying to see that there are so many talented young disciples in our sect. You're right, Shu, who do you think will win this fight? Kenneth turned to Shu and asked. With knitted eyebrows, Shu thought for a while before replying, now that Zen decided to use his sword, it must be one of his ultimate skills. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given up his original fighting style. However, even though Zen has understood the sword intent, it will still be hard for him to beat Tracy after she stimulated the power of the Blue Phoenix. I think it's still going to be Tracy. Really? Kenneth looked down at the competition field again and said, it's very likely that things will go like this. Although Tracy can only use a small part of the Blue Phoenix power, it's still enough to make her almost invincible among the illuminating soul realm. However, for some reasons, I believe that Zen will again perform another of his miracles in this match. A miracle is no longer a miracle if it happens too frequently, rebutted Elder Shu. Zen has defeated too many stronger rivals in this competition and I don't think it's going to happen again. Kenneth was convinced with his words and didn't proceed with the discussion. He finally said, well, let's just wait and see what the result will be. Zen had the silver streamer sword athwart his chest, but he suddenly pointed the sword towards the ground and said, I need to ask you one question before we continue with the fight. Why do you hate me so much? Zen didn't like to be hated by others for no reason, especially by such a beautiful girl who had powerful strength. He felt aggrieved because he didn't think he deserved Tracis' wrath. He couldn't understand why Tracy showed this much hostility towards him. To be honest, there is no reason at all. I just can't help but feel disgusted when I see your calm face, and I really want to give you a good beating. Tracy said in a cold voice. Surprised with what he heard, Zen teased, well, you can try. After that, he slashed his sword at the ground, and mighty sword intent started to flood in his body. With a good grasp of the sword intent, a sword practitioner could defeat any opponent. The best example was Rocher, who had used his sword step and some other skills to beat many rivals. Wing was merely a green hand in the blade intent, but that was enough to help him stand out among the disciples from the 33 peaks. The intent of the weapons was something indistinct and insubstantial, but it was undoubtedly powerful. Tracy also started her attacks after Zen finished his words. The Blue Phoenix was a supernatural bird that was said to be a branch of the super-legendary beast Phoenix. Although it possessed the same great speed of the Phoenix, the Blue Phoenix didn't inherit the divine fire of its legendary ancestor. On the other hand, it had developed the ability to control the wind. When Tracy moved around in the competition field, all the air was stirred up with her motion. This was totally different from the way Cecil controlled the winds. Cecil could control the winds by spreading his life vitality in the air and vibrating it to stir up winds. In Tracis' case, she could directly control the winds as it was an instinct of the Blue Phoenix. In other words, Tracy became the master of the winds through the power of the Blue Phoenix. Her slim body seemed to drift freely in the air. Her figure disappeared in Zen's eyes as she moved with extreme speed. Zoom, she approached Zen quietly like a light breeze. The breeze blew lightly against Zen's face like the one in an early spring day, but he could feel a strong homicidal intent in it. Tracy appeared next to Zen out of the blue and suddenly stabbed Zen with her two ame pricks. Sword intent, shield my body. In the danger of Tracis' sudden attack, Zen surrounded himself with sword intent to protect himself. Ding ding ding, the collision of Zen's sword intent with Tracis' weapons created a pleasing sound. Zen's sword intent was strong, but it couldn't force Tracy to step back. As a blue light flashed in Tracis' eyes, she suddenly strengthened and her ame pricks cut through Zen's sword intent and stabbed directly at him. Poof! When he realized that the sword intent wasn't strong enough to stop Tracy, Zen quickly used the power of the Phoenix Crystal in his arm to increase his speed. He tried to avoid Tracy's attack but to no avail. The Ame pricks stabbed his shoulders and they started to bleed. Dang it, she's powerful. Zen wiped off the blood from his wounds and coldly stared at Tracy. I planned to leave only 2 injuries in your body, but now I changed my mind. I'll make you bleed to my heart's content, Tracy announced in cold tone. Her voice and character changed after she had used the power of the Blue Phoenix, but her willfulness remained the same. Oh really? Zen said sarcastically. I'll stab you 1 more time for every smile you dare to show in front of me. That's 11 stabs now, Tracy warned with the same cold tone. It's not fair to increase the price, Zen said, acting as if complaining. He wasn't threatened by Tracy's warning. He just did that to tease Tracy and see her full potential. 12 now, Tracy spat angrily, gritting her teeth. You can just stab as much as you want. But only if you have the power to do it. Zen lifted the sword in his hand and assumed an attacking posture. Earlier, he was just testing if his sword intent would pose a threat to Tracy or not. But this time, he meant serious business. When Zen wielded his sword in that manner, the audience, including Kenneth, was stunned into silence. That's basic swordsmanship. Everyone broke the silence. To their surprise, Zen was performing the first movement of the basic swordsmanship. Chapter 271, Burning Blood Essence. Basic swordsmanship. The crowd at the current match in Cloud Sect was rendered speechless by what they just saw. Never was such a basic technique used against a powerful opponent. There was only one person who was somewhat glad in the sea of astonished people. It was Zachary, from the 90-foot peak. He had already seen what Zen's excellent basic swordsmanship was capable of, so he understood why the people were shocked by what he did. Maybe Zen's skill just shook them to death, he thought. Back when Zachary first saw Zen use the basic swordsmanship on the 7-star Swordlight platform, he wasn't faced with a tougher opponent. However, now that he was fighting a much stronger foe, he still used the basic swordsmanship. Because of that, Zachary believed that the people were more surprised or even uneasier than he was at that time. The basic swordsmanship was the first set of sword techniques that most martial artists came across. There were also other kinds of primary techniques such as the basic spearsmanship, basic fist position, and so on. In general, an aspiring martial artist would master the whole set of the basic swordsmanship in his childhood, then practice the other kinds of swordsmanship later on using the basic set as the foundation. The basic swordsmanship was quite simple, so it was hard to fight powerful enemies with it because it lacked advanced tactics and power. Therefore, no one would use this kind of swordsmanship in such a grueling fight. It was like using a 1+1 algorithm to solve complex math problems, so one could imagine just how strenuous that was. Has Zen turned into a complete fool? How could he use the basic swordsmanship with a fairy weapon? Does he think this battle with Tracy is a joke? Fighting with the basic swordsmanship in the All Peaks competition of Cloud Sect. That has never happened before, but now it just might make it into history, since the founding of Cloud Sect. Well, I don't know what to say. Perhaps it means that Zen has given up, and the basic swordsmanship is only a symbolic resistance. Among the surprised spectators, Sheeny and Wing conversed animatedly about Zen. Sheeny watched the competition from outside the battlefield, while Wing sat on the ground and healed his wound. Sheeny licked his lips and continued to watch. What's Zen doing? Would he really use basic swordsmanship against Tracy, who has activated the body of the Blue Phoenix? He asked in disbelief. Meanwhile, Rocher's brows furrowed slightly as he watched the fight. With his impressive insight into swordsmanship and sword intent, he noticed that something was wrong with Zen's use of the basic swordsmanship. It was indeed the same technique, but there was also something different about it when viewed from Zen's perspective. It felt strange, but Rocher couldn't put it into words. He just instinctively felt that Zen's swordsmanship wasn't as simple as they thought. Maybe Zen's basic swordsmanship only looks like the actual basic swordsmanship, he said. You must be kidding, Rocher. The basic swordsmanship is the foundation of all the swordsmanships. After countless generations of practice, it has been extremely streamlined, so it's impossible to make any changes to it at all. You might know that better than I do, Sheeny replied with a smile. He also used the same weapon, but his reaching sun sword was particular about the sword power. He hadn't understood the concept of sword intent yet. I don't know, Rocher answered and shook his head. I just have some doubts about that, he added. At that exact moment, Zen finally made a move. Chop, he cried out. His attack was just a simple move with moderate speed, and it wasn't really what one would call outstanding. However, right after Zen had finished cutting with the sword, Rocher suddenly stiffened in shock. The chop seems to be. He was now at a loss for words. His eyes gawked at Zen as if he was an incredible monster. It seemed that no one else could impress Rocher with the use of basic swordsmanship. Shini's eyes widened in astonishment as well. He couldn't say a word and was in a daze for a while. "Monster," he blurted. Although what Zen had done was just a simple move, he had practiced and simplified it in his mind numerous times. It was easy to turn a simple thing into something complicated, but to make a complicated thing simple was another story. The basic swordsmanship was a kind of swordsmanship which had already been simplified for thousands of years by countless generations. However, Zen had simplified it once again many times. The greatest truths were the simplest, and true enlightenment was in nature itself. It was safe to assume that Zen's basic swordsmanship was no longer the original one, but a new set that he created and belonged only to himself. Meanwhile, Tracy, who was currently in the closest range to Zen, felt a strong sense of threat. She knew it was a simple move of chop, but she was also aware that its strength wasn't as simple as it looked. There seemed to be many hidden mysteries in Zen's version of the move with the sword. "It's amazing that you have such special swordsmanship, but you are still no match for me if you only have the sword," Tracy declared. The shadow of the blue phoenix behind her suddenly radiated a bright beam of light, and the life vitality in her hands gradually increased. "The claw of the blue phoenix," Tracy shouted. After that, she bent her fingers and formed several sharp blue nails using the mix of blue light and life vitality, then immediately tried to claw Zen. 5 blue claw imprints, each containing the ferocious strength of the blue phoenix, appeared in the air after Tracy tried to tear Zen. The blue phoenix was one of the legendary beasts. Even though there was just a small part of the blue phoenix's blood in Trasis' body, she was still a terrifying force to reckon. Most of the disciples in Cloud Sect thought that Zen might win the competition with his rare move of chop, but when they felt the immense strength of the blue phoenix in Trasis' body, they changed their minds. It was hard to predict who would win in the fight since both Zen's and Trasis' strengths exceeded the normal level of the other disciples in the All Peaks competition. Even their previous battles and experiences weren't of much help. Only when the match was over could they conclude the winner. Zoom. The sword that Zen held cut upward, right through the 5 blue claw prints. An ear-splitting screeching sound, similar to claws scratching a smooth surface, came from the collision between Zen's streamer sword and the 5 blue claw prints. "Oh my goodness, what is this noise? It makes me dizzy. I'm going to vomit." A lot of disciples who practiced poorly found the screech quite unbearable. Even those disciples who had reached the nature-level consummation had gone pale. They were a bit uncomfortable, but they could tolerate it for the time being. Those disciples who had reached the level of illuminating soul realm frowned slightly and barely reacted to the sound. A fierce sword intent wrapped the 3-foot sword's simple chop and continuously melted the unusually aggressive claw prints. However, the claw of the blue phoenix was quite powerful too. If one were to look closely, they would find countless small wind shears around the claw prints which endlessly tore at the streamer sword. Fortunately, Zen's streamer sword was a fairy weapon, so it was strong enough to resist the small wind shears attacks. If it was just a mysterious or a spiritual weapon, it would have been torn into 2 by now. After a mere second, Zen's chop of the sword had finally taken over the blue claw prints and hacked them into pieces. The blue claw prints are broken. It looks like Zen's sword is stronger than the claw prints. Zen only had an advantage over Tracy because of his weapon. One of the disciples in the crowd said. After all, he has a fairy weapon in his hands, and Tracy has nothing except her claw. He added. Are you sure that Zen had edge over Tracy just because of his weapon? Have you forgotten that Zen is just at the grade 2 of the nature level, while Tracy has already reached the illuminating soul realm? Another one of them countered. When they realized what the latter just said, they all gasped in shock. They felt dumbfounded when they forgot what Tracy could do. She could rely on her great blood strength and the body of the blue phoenix. Moreover, she had already reached the level of illuminating soul realm. On the contrary, Zen was only at grade 2 of the nature level. Grade 2 of the nature level. It was a level lower than all the other disciples, levels in the All Peaks competition. It was at the bottom of the level list of all the inner disciples of Cloud Sect. However, Zen stood on the battlefield of the All Peaks competition and took part in the hard challenges one after the other, which they all couldn't have imagined. They didn't know what to say about the huge skill gap between them and Zen. It was quite amazing. Meanwhile, Zen paid absolutely no attention to other people's comments about him at that moment. After he slashed Tracis' claw prints into pieces with the sword, he kept going with it and performed another move. Pick up words, he shouted. It was another simple move from the basic swordsmanship. Although it looked like it was easy to counterattack, it seemed that Zen was the only sole master of this move. Even powerful men like Kenneth and Elder Shu couldn't find any flaws in Zen's swordsmanship now. Despite that, of course, it did not mean that they would lose to Zen in the competition. There was still a huge gap in skill between Zen and them, and they could easily defeat Zen with their immense strength. They couldn't win when faced with the move, though. Tracy had always kept her cool ever since she had activated the body of the Blue Phoenix. She looked like an incorruptible goddess when she had released massive amounts of power. However, that all changed a little now because of Zen's attacks. She was a playful girl by nature and didn't like to practice. However, she could defeat most of the disciples in the same rank because of the body of the Blue Phoenix and her extraordinary talent, even if she didn't practice a lot. Thus, she still had a chance to win after she had activated the body of the Blue Phoenix, even if she fought against the mighty Patrick. Before her fight with Zen, she thought that she could quickly finish the competition after she activated the body of the Blue Phoenix, but she didn't expect that Zen could cut the Blue Phoenix's strongest killing trick of the claw prints, and he had even fought back now. For Tracy, Zen was just like a small toy for her to play with. That was how she had always viewed Zen. However, the small toy refused to obey and paid her no attention. Tracy, who had always been proud and stubborn, found it unacceptable, and it was why she was angry. Maybe other people, and also even Zen might find her reason for getting angry unfathomable, but that was just how Tracy was, and how she had always been. She wanted to give Zen a lesson and decided that it would be in the form of bleeding holes on his body. And that was what she did. Two MA pricks pierced Zen's shoulder when the body of the Blue Phoenix was activated. However, Zen had the upper hand when he raised his sword. Tracy felt that she was no match for him anymore. Zen is just at grade 2 of the nature level. Maybe he is special, but how can he even compete with me? How can he fight against me? He's just a nobody among hundreds of thousands of disciples in Cloud Sect. He is just one among the countless grains of sand. How can he win against me with the basic swordsmanship, which he learned from nowhere? Tracy angrily thought to herself. I will never lose to you. Tracy gritted her teeth and angrily declared. Her eyes began to blaze a fiery red. It only meant one thing. She was going to burn the blood of the Blue Phoenix. At that moment, Patrick, who stood next to the battlefield, saw that Tracy was forced to retreat by Zen's basic swordsmanship. When he noticed the ruthless and vicious look on Tracis' face, he knew what was going to happen. His mouth immediately went dry. Tracy, don't be stupid. Zen, Tracy is going to burn the blood essence. It will damage her body for life. Stop her, he shouted, panic evident in his voice. Chapter 272, Sparks. In the bright and warm sunlight, the streamer's sword shone exuberantly. As it traveled across the air, the light spots reflected all through its body from the sun started to dance on the surface. As Zen lifted the sword right up to Tracis' throat with a simple flick, the light spots traveled slowly from the hilt to the tip. Right now, the sword blade was just a mere inch away from Tracis' pure white neck. Or one could say that Tracy was only an inch away from certain death now. The distance was so short that if Zen's streamer's sword had flung forward even slightly, Tracis' head would have certainly fallen off. Stay down. I don't know the first thing about this burning blood essence. And if you jeopardize your lifespan, that's none of my concern. But I know your strength might increase a lot with this spell. So of course, I am not going to give you an opportunity to utilize it. You stay put, or you die. Zen was expressionless in his threat, even though his demeanor was frightening. His voice sounded very cold, and seemed to possess no tenderness even towards this beautiful woman. As if to enforce his stance, the streamer's sword in his hand shoved a centimeter forward. Under his fine control, its tip pierced her delicate skin and wisps of blood started trickling down from the fine cut that it had made. The reason behind his stern stance was that even though he was clueless about what that burning blood essence was, he knew that it could have increased Tracis' strength to a terrible extent, especially if the price of doing it was her lifespan. Now that Zen had gained an advantage in this game, he had decided that he wasn't going to give her any chance now. Tracy sensed the icy sword intent pressed against her neck and her taut shoulders seemed to loosen a bit. Right now, she was rooted to the spot like a puppet who had been left free on its strings. In her entire lifetime, she had never been so close to death before. At the sight of her almost defeated, Patrick, who was standing outside the arena, breathed a sigh of relief. Zen had already claimed that he would give Tracy no quarter, and right now, he had succeeded in at least subduing her. As to whether he was going to kill her or not, Patrick was not so worried about that. He had never practiced swordsmanship, but he had heard of it from people and he knew that swordsmanship required a fine character of the practitioner. That doesn't mean it would demand the practitioner to obey the 5 commandments and the 10 commandments like the Buddhism cultivation method I am practicing does, he thought to himself, but its minimum request is that the practitioner has to be upright in his moral ideologies. Being able to go so far in swordsmanship shows that Zen is not a heartless man and has a strength in his character that not everyone might have. The remark he just made was probably a bluff to scare Tracy. The reason Patrick could analyze the fight so deeply could be attributed to his advanced age. The numerous winters which lay behind him allowed him to see the world differently and become more perceptive. That way, he had a lot of experience in analyzing people. However, Tracy was still very young and her mind couldn't have gone far. She couldn't have known that Zen was bluffing. The harsh remark that he had made and the poker expressions on his face immediately intimidated her. He truly won't hesitate to kill me. Tracy was the sort of person who seemed quite petulant and merciless when things were progressing normally. But if one were to say the truth, she was just a highly gifted girl who had not even grown up completely yet. And even though she was sometimes tasked to go on adventures for Cloud Sect, she was always accompanied by several disciples who could protect her if things, at some point, went terribly south ways. But right now, she was alone, and facing such an awful bloke, someone who had declared that he would chop her head off if she didn't stay still. Her long lashes quivered for an instant, and the rim of her eyes turned red. Then, much like flowers were blooming in ultra-fast motion, bean-sized tears started rolling down her cheeks and dropped onto the ground with clear clatters. Very soon, a paddle of tears had formed at her feet. If Zen were to express his emotions truly right now, he would say that he was feeling quite awkward for bringing a girl to tears with his sword. After all, his sword had nibbled at her neck. If possible, he would have chosen not to fight with Tracy, who, being frank, was giving him a headache. But he also knew that now was not the time to be soft-hearted. If he let his stance loose and let her burn that blood essence, then it was highly probable that he would not have been able to secure a win in this match. Crying isn't going to help you. Admitting your defeat is your only option, Zen clarified indifferently. Suddenly, Tracy glanced over her shoulder, which gave Zen quite a turn and he hastened to draw back the streamer sword a little. The very next moment, he heard Tracy moan. In a soft voice she sobbed, "I admit my defeat." Then, the referee, who had been standing to a side for a long time now, finally nodded and announced, "Zen from Drizzle Peak, won. Tracy, a personal disciple, lost." After Zen had withdrawn his streamer sword, Tracy lowered her head and bustled off the stage. Outside the arena, Patrick tried to comfort her and patted her head, his face brimming with affection. However, Tracy shook his hand off like a cranky child, and then stumped into a corner and sat down, her cheeks swollen in her anger. She was pouting. As someone who had been taking care of Tracy like a big brother for a long time now, Patrick knew everything about Tracy's temper. Well, it's all right. Perhaps experiencing some failure will do some good to her mindset and she might be less cranky in the future. The important thing is that Zen did a great job in the arena. At the very least, he stopped Tracy from burning her entire blood essence at the expense of reducing her lifespan. Burning blood essence was something a practitioner would do only in extremely dire circumstances. Cutting down one's own lifetime in order to win a match was the sort of thing that probably only Tracy would do. Therefore, Patrick turned his face towards the arena and nodded at Zen, giving him a grateful smile. Zen smiled back as well before stepping out of the arena. They both knew that they were bound to spar soon. Watching Zen exit the arena triumphantly, Master Wen felt all sorts of feelings well up inside his heart. He had been leading Drizzle Peak for a long time now, and from the very first time that his disciples had participated in the All Peaks competition, his biggest dream had been to see one of them wedge his way into the top 100. He had pinned a lot of hopes this time, but with Yehudi's failure at the very beginning of the competition, the hearts of Master Wen and other masters of Drizzle Peak had sunk to the bottom. However, to all of their surprises, Zen had powered through every match and overcome every opponent, regardless of how strong they were. He had kept on winning all the time and had finally arrived at stage that he was in now. Master Wen's hopes now lay on him now. Apart from letting out a cry of exclamation, he truly did not know what else to say. It's a pity that Aura is not here to see this. I wonder what would her expressions be if she could see her favorite disciple achieve so many things. Master Wen wondered in his head. Unfortunately, a rumor has swept through the entire Burning Sky Empire these days. The Burning Sky Palace is suffering from an internal strife. Some princes are scrambling for the throne, and somehow Aura is involved in it. What a shame. Master Wen was, after all, a master from the same peak as Aura was. The two knew each other well, and that was one of the primary reasons he had been keeping an eye on the Burning Sky Palace and collecting information about Aura. But given that his position was not very high in the hierarchy, he was not so well informed as Saint Vianna was. Accordingly, he had no idea that Aura had already been put under house confinement. Considering the complete lack of messages from Aura, he naturally deducted that Aura was not doing very well and might even be under some sort of confinement. Unfortunately, there was nothing that he could do to help her. And at that moment, Master Wen's eyes lit up suddenly. He had an idea. Zen. Perhaps Zen can help Aura. He has just defeated Tracy. As long as he doesn't act below par, there is no doubt that he is going to make it to the top 3. He is totally qualified to try the Cloud Road. If he really does pass the test of the Cloud Road and gets admitted into the Cloud Hall, he would be able to assist Aura. If Zen joins the Cloud Hall, then it is true that most probably, his strength won't be able to match Elder Shu or Kenneth of Cloud Sect in a short spell, but I am sure that he is going to be of a lot of help. After all, if inside the Cloud Hall, his future is going to be limitless, which means that even Kenneth would have to take his words into account. Ever since Cain, the Emperor of the Burning Sky Palace, disappeared, Kenneth has been the only one who could command the place. Cloud Sect has played an indispensable role throughout the history of the Burning Sky Empire. It even helped several emperors fight their way to the throne. Cloud Sect was even powerful enough to take control over the whole Burning Sky Palace in the past once. But ever since Cain has marched into the Cloud Hall with his amazing talents, his power has become even more impressive than Kenneth's, and that gave him more leverage. The moment Cain started to rule the Burning Sky Empire, it began to break free from the control of Cloud Sect. After all, Cain's position is not beneath Kenneth's. Cain and Kenneth are both working for Cloud Hall, and that is the sole reason why the powerful Burning Sky Palace and the mighty Cloud Sect have had no serious conflicts until now. However, with the disappearance of Emperor Cain, whose return to the Empire alive and well is uncertain, it's a good time for Kenneth to take over again in this turbulent situation. Unfortunately, Kenneth does not seem tempted by this idea, and that beats me completely. Instead, he has just let those princes fight each other in the palace. Based on all the information that Master Wen had collected, all he could do was analyze the situation and come up with plans. Other means and ideas were simply out of his reach given his present position. Staring at Zen, who was sitting cross-legged a short distance away, Master Wen decided to have a serious conversation with him when the All Peaks competition was over. He believed that Zen would not ignore the hardship Aura was enduring. After all, he couldn't have forgotten the grace that Aura had bestowed on him. When the round robin came to this point, the ranking of most of the participants had already settled, with only the top 5 somewhat disputable. First to mention were 2 black horses, Zen and Rocher, both of whom had not lost a single match so far. Zen had even vanquished Tracy, who had the body of a blue phoenix. In light of that, the entire crowd was under the impression that he could be one of the top 3. However, his exact position in that trio wasn't decided yet. Rocher still had not unsheathed his sword, but had still managed several victories, which meant that his power was unfathomably high. Ever since he had gotten into the round robin, he had easily defeated his opponents without demonstrating any impressive skills, so everyone believed Rocher had the ability to make it to top 5. Next were Patrick and Jacques. These two were the best out of all personal disciples. If everything went their way, then the crowd had a general agreement that they would end up the champion and the runner-up respectively. As to Tracy, she seemed quite dispirited over her last failure, so no one knew whether she would come onto the stage again. But if she did, then there were very high chances that she would find herself in the top 5. However, no matter how much they calculated, there was one more person who was probably going to influence the ranking of the All Peaks competition. Once he entered the competition, then it was certain that every participant was going to fall one rank lower. That figure was Evan. Evan had earned the title of the top personal disciple on Cloud Sect, and his powers were widely acknowledged all around. Everyone respected him and thought that he would always remain the top disciple. However, Evan was still in the middle of a closed-door training and no one knew if he was going to come. They were all wondering whether he would medal in the final of the round robin. Therefore, he was an unpredictable factor, which was excluded from their calculation at the moment. More importantly, it was the ones above them who would determine the order of top seats on the Cloud sect ranking as well as the ranking of this All Peaks competition. What the crowd was most concerned about was the confrontation among them. Of course, that did not mean that these disciples did not care for the contests among other participants. After all, the competition for the top 100 was directly going to decide the ranking of the 33 peaks, and that was, perhaps, the second most important thing for the disciples. As the people looked on with great expectations, waiting for the next round to begin, wondering who was going to come next, the referee finally declared the opening of a highly crucial match, personal disciple Jacques versus Zen of Drizzle Peak. Previously, when Jacques had stepped into the arena, he had proclaimed that he wanted to challenge Zen. He had been so sure of himself that he had promised he would restrain his illuminating soul realm cultivation within the nature level. But it turned out that Zen was even more arrogant, and had answered that Jacques did not need to restrain his level of cultivation and they were going to have a fair duel when the time came. The duo had become quite hostile towards each other even before coming on stage. Now, with their match up next, they were finally going to encounter each other during the round robin. Every single person in the audience knew clearly that they now had a huge drama to watch. Chapter 273, Crash Into You. Jacques got popular at the All Peaks competition when he rose to the top last time, a clear black horse in the running. As a personal disciple who was only at grade 2 of the nature level, Jacques making to the list of top 100 had shocked the disciples of Cloud sect. He managed to overturn the status quo and did well in the more difficult challenges against the higher level disciples. His miraculous performance had long been discussed by many delighted spectators. It was largely assumed that nobody else would be able to achieve the same feats as Jacques, for it was truly difficult to face someone who had been in the higher level. Nobody thought his record would be bested after 3 years. The young man, Zen, broke it easily with his fierce postures and astounding strength. At grade 2 of the nature level, Jacques had made an impressive record at the All Peaks competition when he got into the top 100. But in the same competition, Zen had broken records again and again to make it to the lists of the top 100, top 50, and then to the top 5. The records he made were nothing short of a miracle in the present and past combined. Latecomers could only marvel at the records in shock. In the years to come, some people found it hard to believe that Zen had really achieved all that. After all, they hadn't been there to witness it. Jacques was arrogant. For him, it was no big deal to be one in the top 100 list when one belonged to grade 2 of the nature level. He had steeled himself to face every tough challenge at the All Peaks competition 3 years ago. He didn't care about his record, but it bothered him that Zen broke it. Because of that, everyone would compare him to Zen. Jacques wanted to quash such comparisons straight away, so he decided to defeat Zen in a match. It was why he challenged Zen as soon as he got to the competition field. Unfortunately, they hadn't drawn each other's names on the round robin before. It's destiny. You can't escape it, Jacques spoke as he stood before Zen. When did I escape? Zen asked him with curiosity. Jacques laughed. Perhaps you didn't, but you are still afraid to compete with me. Am I wrong? Afraid? Zen smirked casually as if he had heard a great joke. After thinking for a moment, he said, why should I be afraid? Didn't you offer to fight me by lowering yourself to the nature level? Even if you decide to lower yourself to the consummation of nature level, I would outmatch you. Do you really think I'd be afraid of you then? Yeah, I do remember Jacques saying that. At that time, I thought his proposal was well-meaning, but now I think it's funny, one of the spectators whispered. That's true. Zen may lose to Jacques with all his strength, but he can't lose to Jacques if he's at the nature level. Jacques was just showing off, his friend said. But didn't Zen refuse the offer? Why is he bringing it up now? Jacques did say that, but after some thought, he realized that although he could unquestionably crush Zen with his current strength, he would not best Zen if he lowered himself to the consummation level, let alone the nature level. Zen had rejected the offer before, but he hinted at it again. His only purpose was to embarrass Jacques. Jacques certainly wouldn't be tricked. He huffed, saying, I did give you such an offer, but you refused it. It's not that I didn't give you a chance. You missed out. You're bad. But I don't want that opportunity. I just want to let you know that I am not afraid of you or hiding from you, so you don't need to lower your cultivation level. Now do you understand? Zen laughed at him. Jacques grimaced. He had no interest in arguing with him. In fact, this kind of verbal back and forth between warriors was part of the battle. It was just like when two armies went to war, the general of one side would provoke or abuse the other. They did it to frustrate the other's spirit and indirectly weaken their opponent's fighting resolve. Warriors did the same. It was all about momentum. If an opponent was in bad spirits, the momentum shifted to the other. A warrior, when rightly motivated, put forth his best foot in battle. You have a ready tongue, but it doesn't matter. When you face my full wrath, Zen, your tongue alone will remain. As he said thus, Jacques' life vitality started to spread about, layer upon layer of blood fog erupting, that at once turned into a sheet of thick and solid armor. The law of conservation could never fail. A person gained as much as he paid for. Balance of energy was to be maintained. Jacques' cultivation methods were evil, for which he had paid a huge price. Many of the evil cultivation methods were far stronger than others from the same tier. Case in point, the evil method of bleached bone distilled soul. It was a tier 4 cultivation method, but it was more powerful than the ordinary methods of the tier. The best of those ordinary methods could not eclipse the bleached bone distilled soul. The set of white bone armor had an ominous defensive power, and even Zen's body, which was a spiritual weapon in itself, was inferior to it. After Jacques summoned the white bone armor, Zen released his demonic phantoms. Jacques didn't expect to see the 6 demonic phantoms. Won't you use a sword? Zen's unnaturally good basic swordsmanship had left a deep impression in Jacques, which was one of the reasons he didn't dare to lower his cultivation level. In the past, he wouldn't have cared about what Zen thought. Even if Zen didn't need him to, Jacques would have lowered himself to fight Zen. After all, Jacques had formed a habit of challenging those who belonged to higher levels of cultivation. A youngling of a low level challenging him. It seemed ludicrous to him. Jacques was so conceited that he refused to accept it. However, when he saw Zen use his basic swordsmanship, he realized that if he lowered himself to the nature level, he would never be able to defeat Zen. Jacques had to abandon the plan then. Reluctantly, he admitted that Zen might have more talent and potential than him. It's not my time to use it yet, Zen said as the demonic phantoms flew around him. If you don't use it now, you will not get another chance. Jacques was onto Zen before he even finished speaking, darting over to him in moments. His white bone armor had overwhelming defensive power. Even the armor of the fairy weapon was inferior to it. His armor was made out of his own life vitality and did not burden him with weight. It was connected to his mind, so he could control it more smoothly as if it was an extension of his body. Jacques stood before him, a threatening aura emanating from him, but Zen was in no hurry. Zen controlled his 6 demonic phantoms mentally and they rushed over to Jacques at the same time. Bang! Jacques, covered with the white bone armor, was like a human-shaped chariot that hit the 6 demonic phantoms. His white bone armor was tough, but the demonic phantoms were not weak either. At the first hit itself, the demonic phantoms intercepted Jacques. Jacques took a slow, deep breath and sneered. Several more patches of blood fog exploded, surrounding him. The almost perfect white bone armor now had some new modifications. 2 horns were added to it, leaving it more defensive than ever. I didn't expect your summoning to have this kind of strength. Let's see how you resist me this time. Jacques bolted to Zen once again. He was truly confident about his strength. Without using any complex techniques, he tried to smash Zen, singularly relying on his white bone armor. He was right to be so self-assured. The white bone armor had been upgraded. When the demonic phantoms bumped against it for a second time, narrow cracks appeared on them, knocking them to pieces and turning them to dust, back into the demonic life vitality. So you wanted to block me with that trick? Ha! Let's see you try again. Jacques grinned victoriously as he sprinted over to Zen. However, before he could take even 2 steps, the 6 splintered demonic phantoms congealed again and dashed over to him. Did you even watch me fight before? Zen smiled. My demonic phantoms can't be broken so easily. Unlike in the ordinary cultivation methods, the demonic phantoms were made out of life vitality. They were avatars that Zen borrowed from the heaven and the earth, but he didn't need to return them if they were broken. They could be congealed repeatedly, taking shape to fight the enemy once again. It was still early in the battle. The demonic phantoms recovering after being crushed into pieces brought Jacques much trouble. He had wasted 5 minutes on these phantoms already. Jacques attacks too simply. He wants to defeat Zen by just trying to knock the phantoms around. He is definitely more talented than that. But he likes to keep it simple and crude. Zen, however, is not easy to handle. He is a very patient fighter. He really is patient. When Jacques tried to hit at those demonic phantoms, Zen acted as if he had all the time in the world to take a rest. It was an exaggeration to say that Zen took a rest on the competition field. But mind-controlling the demonic phantoms was easy for him as Jacques tried to resist them over and over again. Jacques was so adamant about wanting to win the battle with his all-conquering white bone armor that Zen decided to be patient. There was no time limit for battles on the competition field. Even if Jacques fought the demonic phantoms again and again for a year, Zen would still wait patiently. After being at it for more than 10 minutes, Jacques finally realized that he was acting like a fool. He was well shielded with the white bone armor, but he could feel the disciples at the sidelines muttering disparagingly as if he was an idiot. It was meaningless to bother with Zen's demonic phantoms. Jacques straightened up, finally thinking clearly. He suddenly doubled up his speed. Making a detour around the demonic phantoms, he moved to attack Zen. "You've finally stopped mucking around." Seeing Jacques approach, Zen smiled faintly. He too sped up, but not to escape. To Jacques' amazement, Zen dashed into his shoulder. "Am I seeing this correctly?" One of the disciples in the crowd wondered out loud. Zen plans to confront the tough armor with the strength of his body. Jacques is wearing the white bone armor, that means he is hidden behind a brilliant defense shield, someone said. Nothing except a fairy weapon can break into his armor. Zen is not using his sword. He wants to use his physical body. That's why he is slamming into Jacques. Are you serious? Jacques is like a human-shaped chariot. He can crush opponents with the white bone armor alone. I accept that Zen has an innate superhuman strength and that his body is tough, but how can he survive running into Jacques' shield? Jacques too seemed stunned and curious, but then his face shifted to show glee. He had been afraid that Zen would play a kind of guerrilla war with him. If Zen had dodged him at first and then kept evading him, it would be difficult for Jacques to attack him. However, this guy didn't run away. Instead, he dashed at Jacques. Is he insane? Jacques wondered. Fine, as you wish. I will disable you, so that nobody would dare compare you with me again. Just as they were about to bump into each other, the dragon scales in Zen's mind lit up. Chapter 274, Flood Dragon Bone Spear. More than 100 dragon scales were activated simultaneously, generating even more power for Zen's body like flood peaking between canyons. The energy that flowed through his body was so intense that his shoulders became swollen, and his blood vessels were distended as if dragons were flying on the surface of his skin. As they were about to collide, Jacques laughed and then roared, "I will smash you to pieces." However, Zen managed to avoid the sharp horns of Jacques' white bone armor and directly hit him on the shoulder. Thud! With the strength of the two opposing forces, their collision created a loud thudding sound that echoed. To the surprise of everyone who witnessed the violent impact, Jacques, in his white bone armor, was knocked down and then thrown from one edge of the fighting ground to another. And finally, he slammed into the light curtain of enchanted barrier. In the past, some disciples also crashed into the same barrier with the force of a single punch. Designed to protect disciples from collisions that usually took place during such contests, the light curtain of enchanted barrier was very soft. Its primary function was to separate disciples from viewers during competitions, so it was not built to withstand powerful collisions. But Zen summoned all the explosive forces from the dragon scales as he slammed into Jacques. If Jacques, in his white bone armor, was referred to as a war chariot, Zen was then regarded as a ferocious beast. Such powerful and pure force was unleashed on Jacques, causing him to hurtle backward. This collision force exceeded the limit the enchanted barrier could bear. Spectators could only see from outside the barrier when the light curtain shook a few times and were aghast when they noticed cracks in the structure like those in a broken mirror before it finally burst into pieces. While it helped absorb some of the collision force on Jacques, it could not prevent him from flying out into the field. Without any sign of slowing down, he was thrown into the crowd, crashing into any object along his path. Fortunately for Jacques, he was headed towards the area where Skytop Peak disciples were. They saw what happened to him, so Rocher, Sheeny, and even Wing, who was still in recovery, immediately stretched out their hands to catch the flying disciple. It was the only way to halt the oncoming Jacques and help him to get up. Once Jacques was finally upright, the disciples from other peaks felt relieved and relaxed a bit. But they were still somewhat fearful that it could happen again. It was fortunate there were several powerful disciples from Skytop Peak. There might not have been fighters strong enough to hold him back if Jacques hurtled towards the direction of either Drizzle Peak or Vulture Peak. And that would have resulted in many being injured or worse, killed. Though Zen had displayed innate superhuman strength since the very beginning, he had never discharged all his ultimate power before that collision. So, at this point, everybody was still shocked by the energy he had thrown at Jacques, nor could they understand what took place. Not everyone was fortunate to have innate superhuman strength, which made them extraordinarily powerful. For martial artists, being born with superhuman strength might give them an edge, especially during fights, but people usually did not take this advantage seriously. Strength was a fundamental component in battle. A fighter with innate superhuman strength would have a distinct advantage during competitions. However, the body's physical strength was limited, unlike one's life vitality, which had the potential to grow. The strength derived from life vitality was usually dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of times greater than the normal body's strength. In that case, no matter how great the power derived from human body was, it was still not enough to knock down Saint Vienna with a single punch from a long distance, much like what Kenneth did. And this was the reason why martial artists were all focused on refining the life vitality and paid little attention to pure body refinement. They did not think that body refinement did much to enhance their refining life. With little opportunity for progress in pure body refinement, why even give it importance or attention? So how was Zen able to do what he just did? Everyone who witnessed this was astonished. How could he overthrow Jacques, who wore white bone armor? He didn't even have any protective gear and only used his body to make the collision. So, how did he manage that? Did their minds play tricks on them just now? Was it an illusion that they saw? They all looked at one another, only to find similar confused expressions in everyone's face. If only one person witnessed it, the scene might have passed as an illusion. But many saw it at the same time, so it had to be real. If that was what precisely happened, then what came to mind was the enormous power Zen had showed just now, and everyone was suddenly terrified. The talented disciple had done exceptionally well, to the astonishment of the entire Cloud sect in this all-peaks competition. While most of those present were confused and scared, Jacques, who was one of the heroes in the scene, had even more mixed feelings. He finally stood up with the help of his companions. Before colliding with Zen, he had been very excited, expecting to see this arrogant young fighter get smashed to pieces before his eyes. But as they crashed into one another, the excitement was replaced by confusion. No one knew better the power Zen used to fight than Jacques. Being hurled out of the battlefield, he was no longer confused but fearful. Now, there was only a look of helplessness on his face. He knew in his mind that Zen was a tough fighter. Prior to their meeting, Jacques also considered himself fierce with sufficient strength to defeat his opponents. To his surprise, Zen was more ruthless and tougher than himself. Confident in the capacity of his white bone armor, Jacques threatened to crush Zen to pieces. But Zen, without a hint of fear, didn't even dodge his attack but instead met him head-on with hard crushing power to overwhelm him, and then finally had the upper hand. At this point, Jacques still had not lost the fight. Under the rules, the fight would be over only when one of the fighters admitted defeat or could not fight again. Otherwise, the competition did not stop. Although he had been thrown out of the field by Zen, it might be because the light curtain of enchanted barrier was not sturdy enough to absorb the impact of the collision and thus, cracked. Unless Jacques admitted himself beaten, he had to continue the battle. By now, Jacques' emotions were complex and indescribable. It was akin to one skilled Chinese Go player being matched up with a chess player, but this chess player also had the skills to play Go and ultimately won over the Go player using the latter's strategy. Being defeated in what he considered his jurisdiction was far more frustrating and humiliating for Jacques than any loss he had suffered in the past. Still, he had to return to the fighting field regardless of his feelings and thoughts. Now, his previous arrogant face was replaced by a serious look when he stepped back on the field. Jacques stared at Zen, knowing he must go all out in the coming battle. Although he had prepared to fight, there were still doubts in Jacques' mind. He had tested the strength of his white bone armor. Zen slammed into the armor with extreme force. If his body were not tough enough to endure such force, his bones would have broken like the enchanted barrier. But when Jacques returned to the field, he saw Zen standing calmly, without any visible injury. How did he do that? Jacques wondered. It confused him more. Unlike the jumble of emotions that Jacques was feeling, Zen was very much relaxed. After his opponent's return, he just waved his arms, rubbed his hands to prepare, and with a taunting smile, said, "Another hit. I'm ready for that." The daring words left Jacques speechless, his heart nearly plummeting. He nearly felt blood rise to his throat and come out of his mouth. At the same time, what initially seemed like tiny misgivings now turned into incredulity. His white bone armor could easily withstand the attack from a high-level spiritual weapon. It was impossible to penetrate this armor unless it was a fairy weapon. But now with Zen standing there without any injury after colliding with his metal covering sent a frisson of fear down his spine. Did that mean that Zen's body was as tough as that of a high-level spiritual weapon? If that was the case, was he still human? Too many thoughts and possibilities were popping up in his chaotic mind. Before facing Zen in battle, Jacques enjoyed challenging people of a higher level and always came out victorious. He attributed this to his tough white bone armor. But now that he was defeated by a person who only made use of his physical abilities, Jacques felt lost. Any confidence he gained from his previous achievements now seemed insignificant. Unknown to Jacques, he was the first to test Zen's physical strength. Before this competition, no one knew the limits to Zen's physical abilities. He was only injured once, and that was because Tracy, with the power of Blue Phoenix, stabbed him. Other than that episode, no one came close to testing his limits. In their battle, Jacques overestimated the toughness of Zen's body. The strength of Zen's body was similar to that of a mid-level spiritual weapon. It was only recently when he entered this level, and then he reached the peak of this spiritual weapon level after these days' refinement. Anyway, there was still a huge gap between his body and the high-level spiritual weapon. But it was Zen's experience and combat expertise that was a crucial factor in this encounter. He bumped into Jacques' white bone armor with his shoulder. When they slammed into his opponent, his tight and powerful shoulder muscles eased some of the collision force. On the other hand, the force Jacques unleashed towards Zen's body was automatically transformed into warm currents, which his seemingly mystical body absorbed. Even though Zen was only a middle-level spiritual weapon, he possessed a magical power which other spiritual weapons lacked, and which was not easily understood. As far as the spectators were concerned, they had witnessed Jacques in many successful fights with his hard white bone armor, and this defeat by Zen was his first. Seeing his serious face now, they understood that Jacques would be trying his best in the next round. "You surprise me, Zen. You really are interesting. It seems I have underestimated your strength. It is unrealistic to vanquish you with pure strength alone," Jacques sneered. His remark had Zen raising an eyebrow. He answered, "Or you can also say that is a naive way of thinking." I have to admit that yes, I was too naive before. Jacques didn't care for the sarcasm in Zen's words, so he gave him a cold smile. "But now, you will have a taste of my real power. Just a reminder, you will later regret this. You will regret standing here to fight me," he said menacingly. After issuing the threat, Jacques began to generate a massive blood fog in his hands. Compared to the previous blood fog, this one had more strength and intensity. It was almost like the blood left by some wild beast from an ancient savage land with highly unusual blood vessels. When the cloud of blood gradually dissipated, a bone spear appeared in his hands. The spear shone with a pale green light, and on top of the bone were layers of complex runes. He raised the bone spear and stabbed it towards the sky. Instantly, a dragon's roar emanated from the weapon. This is the bone spear made from a section of a flood dragon's spine. You are very lucky to be the first to taste its power in the All Peaks competition. With a glint in his eyes, Jacques enunciated each word. Flood dragon. Flood dragon was a category of the dragon, although it was far from being a genuine dragon. It was neither a super legendary beast nor even a normal legendary beast. And it would never come close to Tracy's Blue Phoenix. Unfortunately, while Tracy might have the blood of the Blue Phoenix, her current strength was still not enough for her to master the total power of the Phoenix. In Jacques' hand was a part of the dragon's spine. Just how powerful the flood dragon bone spear was, no one knew for sure. But right after Zen heard the dragon roar from the bone spear, he felt subtle changes in his mind. He sensed the cyan dragon on the giant furnace in his mind shook a little, which was followed by a barely perceptible roar from the creature. The dragon language was strange and complicated, and one Zen did not comprehend. Many of its syllables were barely audible or were undetectable by human ears. So, it took him by surprise that right this moment, it was clear to him what the dragon's roar meant. "What, you want to eat that bone spear made of the flood dragon's spine?" he asked in his head. Once he understood the dragon's intent, a strange look came over Zen's face. Chapter 275, Down on Your Knees. In Zen's inner mind, there were 9 giant dragons that lay on a mysterious smelting furnace. Each appeared as natural as a living creature. The 9 dragons seemed like engravings on the surface of the furnace. However, Zen was highly suspicious that they were not decorations at all, but real dragons with their own consciousness. For now, though, only one cyan dragon seemed to be gradually regaining consciousness as Zen's heavenly essence had infiltrated its body. But from the moment it started to move until now, it had not communicated with Zen. So how did Zen realize the dragon's awakening? There had been 2 occasions when he was in crisis, and the dragon roared to help him get through those predicaments. The first was during the selection of the cultivation method at Heavenly Library, where he had to face the dominant pressure of vengeful beast. The second was during a fight against terrifying and angry ghosts in Fairy Palace. Other than those 2 occasions, the 9 dragons usually seemed like decorations, lying quietly on the furnace without any smell of living creatures. But today, that one cyan dragon took the initiative to communicate with Zen. Why? It even told him about wanting to devour Jacques Bone's spear. It was true that the mysterious smelting furnace had provided an undeniably large contribution to his current achievements, which he attained with great effort one step at a time. Without the furnace's support in forging his body and spirit at the beginning, and improving his martial arts skills tremendously, it would have been hard for Zen to leave the Luo family home. While Zen was not aware of the origin of the furnace, he understood that the mystical equipment, with the 9 dragons on it, as well as the black flame it produced, was highly valuable and powerful beyond his imagination and should never be shown to anyone else. Even after using the black flame in the smelting furnace to melt his weapons and extract the heavenly essence, Zen would still carefully entrust Worth with its auction. He never dared market it himself, for fear that should a setback occur during sales, someone watching might use it against him to plot something evil. He once heard an old maxim that said the precious stone landed its innocent possessor in jail. Zen took this to mean that an innocent man could get into big trouble because of his well-known wealth. Based on Zen's present strength, once the secret leaked out, any advantage it might have would be lost, and instead, it would only endanger his life because of those who would be after his treasure. So why was it that the cyan dragon was now sending him a message, asking for help to devour the bone spear? A very low-grade dragon, the flood dragon was only a subspecies. Despite its low grade, it belonged to the dragon family. After some thought, Zen came to the conclusion that the dragon smell hidden in the flood dragon's spine attracted the attention of the cyan dragon, making it extremely look forward to devouring the bone spear, so it had to communicate with him. But in doing so, the cyan dragon left Zen in a dilemma. Without a doubt, Jacques was powerful. Although Zen used the power of dragon scales to knock him down and drive him out of the battle ring earlier, it didn't mean that the young disciple had more advantage over him. Jacques just underestimated his opponent's power, and in trying to crush Zen with brutal strength, he did not expect to get a dose of his own medicine. Because of arrogance, Jacques failed to display his real strength. Now with the dragon bone spear in hand, he got ready for a real fight. Examining the weapon in his hand made him sigh. This bone spear constantly exuded a sense of majesty, which was a deterrent inherited from its ancestors and born in its blood. Meanwhile, Zen was unsure if he could defeat Jacques considering his top-grade power and weapon, which gave the man all the right to be arrogant. Under such circumstances, it would be quite tricky to snatch the bone spear so the cyan dragon could devour it. While Zen was contemplating on an efficient attack, Jacques launched his offensive against Zen. The fighter gently put the bone spear on the ring, as it was being infused with his life vitality continuously. Glancing at his foe, Jacques sneered. Supreme dragon power, he shouted to announce the movement he was about to make. Though a non-living object, the bone spear was still made from a dragon's spine. The formidable power of the dragon blood hidden inside it suddenly increased by 100 times shortly after it was stimulated by Jacques' life vitality. All dragons are created to be formidable. It is the fate of thousands of creatures to end up prostrating themselves before the feet of dragons. I suggest that you prostrate yourself before me. It was with a faint smile that he confidently made this declaration. A moment ago, Zen drove him out of the ring with such a strong force that embarrassed him in front of so many people. In fact, it cost him far more than shame. Therefore, he wanted not only to win this competition but also to humiliate Zen in equal measure. After the formidable dragon blood power activated by Jacques' life vitality was suddenly released, it flowed towards Zen without warning, like a tsunami with enough power that could topple mountains and overturn seas. In fact, such daunting power of the dragon race was very similar to the momentum of a human race. The top-grade power of the human race, like Kenneth's power alone, was enough to weaken the stamina of the hands and feet of an ordinary person, and even made him drop to his knees. Compared to human race, the dragon race's power was more terrifying and sharper. 90% of the power was pouring itself into Zen, while the remainder was headed to places around the battle ring. When disciples from each peak sensed the horrendous pressure coming from such power, everyone's face turned dreadfully pale, and disciples with lower cultivation base looked as if they were standing on ice and snow, teeth chattering from the cold, and making loud noises. Poof! Came the sound of a body collapsing. One disciple, without any warning, fainted and fell to the ground. Casting a glance at Elder Shu, Kenneth said, "I seem to have witnessed too many of the unexpected in this year's All Peaks competition." This time, unexpectedly, Jacques could even get the spine of a flood dragon. The spine of a flood dragon could be used to forge weapons and refine pills. After taking this pill, a person's body would be reborn with a trace of the flood dragon's blood. Such a valuable treasure would arouse even Kenneth's interest. Of course, because of who he was, Kenneth naturally would never do anything such as stealing Jacques' bone spear. 3 years ago, I said that Jacques was a man of great luck. As he develops further, he may be able to get more chances and draw even more good luck. I'm afraid this time Zen might be defeated, Elder Shu commented. Kenneth laughed and asked, "When you said Jacques was very lucky and will likely have several other chances, does that mean that Zen could not obtain such good fortune?" He pointed at the flying knife in Zen's hand and said, "Look at his knife, the heavenly ogre fist he displayed, and the basic swordplay methods he mastered by himself. Which one would you say is ordinary?" "Your Grace, you are right. I may still have some prejudice against him, knowing that Zen's strength is only in the low grade. The overwhelming force of the flood dragon has had adverse reactions on many disciples. I shall go down to help them," Elder Shu said hastily. He made the remark after seeing the painful expressions on lower grade disciples' faces. After quickly jumping down from the high platform, he waved a wrinkled hand gently in the air and watched as emerald green life vitality transformed into a curtain of light, shrouding areas around the battle ring. The flood dragon's power made many disciples feel like lingering in the ice and snow, naked, and there was no way for them to resist the lure of the cold. If this continued for an extended period of time, it could damage their spirits. But as soon as the light curtain from Elder Shu's hand lightly swept over them, everyone suddenly felt as if they were dressed in thick cotton clothes and were warm enough to withstand the extreme cold. If a mere 10% of the power released from it could cause so much pain for many disciples, what was the effect on Zen, who was absorbing the remaining 90%? Everyone was now curious how the young disciple was dealing with it. With Elder Shu's help, the crowd resisted the flood dragon's power and began to watch the situation in the battle ring. They desperately wanted to see what happened to Zen at that moment. Compared to regular mortals, Zen's spirit strength was far stronger. When he entered the Tier 4 cultivation method hall of the Heavenly Library, he did not need the help of the Cyan Dragon, but instead, relied on his own spirit to resist the pressure generated by the intent of the vengeful beast. But as he entered the hidden room behind the Tier 4 cultivation method hall, he was attacked head-on by the spirit of vengeful beast. The Cyan Dragon in his mind helped Zen resist this surprise attack. What made Jacques' Flood Dragon Bone Spear more dangerous was that a secret cultivation method strengthened its power. So the spear produced 30% more power compared to energy released by the vengeful beast. Under the attack of such overwhelming power, and to that extent, it was not very hard to imagine the situation faced by Zen at the moment. But unexpectedly, Zen gritted his teeth and chose to bear the hardship. Through the cultivation method written in the spiritual thorn, Zen exercised his spirit and entered into a state where he forgot himself enough to deepen his spirit strength step by step. As a result, even if the Flood Dragon Bone Spear's power was daunting, Zen still managed to resist its attack successfully for the moment. But its effect on the warrior was not good. His usually ruddy face was as pale as a sheet at that moment. "Well, I must say it's a surprise that you can resist my attack for quite a long period, so now, I want to see how long you can hold against it," Jacques challenged Zen. After delivering the threat, he pounded the bone spear hard on the ground, which awakened the flood dragon that began to roar. The first roaring sound echoed throughout the arena. Furious, Jacques demanded, "Get down on your knees. Roar, get down on your knees." Then, the dragon roared once more. "Get down on your knees." As Jacques pounded the bone spear on the ground thrice in a row, the dragon answered back with a furious roar every time. As a consequence, the dominant power of the spear kept pouring into Zen like a surging wave 3 times as well, each wave stronger than the previous one. Meanwhile, the words, "Get down on your knees," that Jacques kept barking at Zen, were likewise filled with indisputable majesty as if demanding him to come before the order of the King in heaven and on earth. How can Zen resist such power? If it were me, I'm afraid my spirit would have been destroyed and my body would already be a pile of dust at this moment, one disciple, fear written on his face, said. My goodness, Jacques is a monster. How could he launch such dangerous attacks? Even if Elder Shu helped block the pressure, my knees are still quite weak, and I would want to get down on them, another one added. Alas, Jacques' previous attacks using that white bone armor were quite bold but simple. And I did not expect him to launch his spirit attacks in the same manner. What's more, such brutal attacks are so powerful that it's impossible to resist, said another disciple, who was awed by everything he witnessed. Even though Elder Shu was helping disciples seated among the audience resist the pressure, they continued to quiver in fear upon seeing the situation on the battle ring. Patrick, seated on the ground, heard loud dragon roars that urged him to open his eyes slightly. There was a grave look on his face. But after a few moments, he shut his eyes calmly this time. The Buddha cultivation method was broad and profound, and perhaps, he already had a way to deal with Jacques' bone spear. With the long sword on his back, Rocher heard the 3 roars of the dragon. His fingers trembled at the sound and had to touch the sword handle behind him. As the disciple felt his sword, he heaved a gentle sigh. His eyes reflected the flickering light as he closely watched the ongoing competition in the arena. Meanwhile, in the arena Zen felt as if his spirit was shaking under a big storm, like a leaf hanging precariously on a tree branch, which at any time could be swept away by the wind to any place. But oddly, even with his perilous situation, Zen was tenacious in resisting the attacks. This competition was undoubtedly the most dangerous one for Zen. Earlier, he had won all the way and had never been so close to being defeated. In truth, the strength gap between Zen and Jacques was not so wide. But rather than his own strength, Jacques depended on the power of the dragon bone spear that was in his hand. Zen, on the other hand, only trusted his own spiritual strength to combat the offensives. This was because he wanted to see the extent of his resistance. Not long after, a trace of blood was slowly oozing from the corners of Zen's mouth. While spirit attacks made idiots out of people or broke their brains into pieces, they would never hurt people intentionally. In order to stay awake, he bit his tongue so hard that blood trickled out his mouth. Taking a deep breath, he said in a cold tone, "Who do you think you are? You think you can order me to get me down on my knees? You, humph. You're not competent enough to demand that." Chapter 276, A More Powerful Dragon Roar. Jacques was a little surprised when he saw that Zen still had the strength to rise to his feet and speak. Although Jacques had more powerful skills, he hadn't expected that Zen would have resisted his attack with his soul. It meant that Zen could withstand the power from the flood dragon. The flood dragon bone spear in Jacques' hand was made of the 3rd section of the flood dragon's vertebra, which contained the most vigorous energy and blood among all sections. Besides, to refine this bone spear, he had asked one of the most well-known weapon refining masters, Brady, to draw 13 lines of array Sanskrit on it. From among these, 6 lines of the array Sanskrit were able to initiate the power of the dragon bone while the other 7 lines were used to amplify the power of the spear. Each line of the array Sanskrit had cost him about 100,000 cubic crystals. So he had spent 1,300,000 cubic crystals for all 13 lines of array Sanskrit. Jacques was more surprised than the onlookers to see that Zen had survived the attack from such great dragon power, because only Jacques knew how powerful the dragon bone spear was. "This is quite unexpected," Jacques said, disappointed. After all, he had put a lot of efforts into this attack and had expected to defeat Zen with a blow. It seemed he had miscalculated Zen's competence. "You withstood my attack, but your soul has been injured badly. Although you're good enough to bear the power of the 3 dragon roars, if I use more powerful attacks, you will die or become an idiot. If you admit you're defeated now, I will let you go." With his personality, Jacques wasn't the kind of person to show mercy to his opponent. However, maybe because Zen had withstood the 3 dragon roars, he changed his mind and decided to give a chance to Zen to throw in the towel. "Do you mean that I should thank you because you asked me to admit that I'm a loser?" Zen wiped the blood off his lips and asked. "Yes, since you have almost used up your strength, I don't think you are capable of continuing the fight," Jacques answered with a shake of his head. Zen continued with a smile, "I admit that you have something to be proud of and be admired for by most disciples of Cloud Sect because they might not reach your level in their lives. However, no matter how strong you are, there's always someone stronger. I don't believe you are stronger than I am. You are not in a position to ask me to surrender." Jacques' eyebrow shot up. He wondered why Zen was speaking this way in such a situation. Either he is an idiot, or he has something to fall back on. Obviously, he is not stupid. Does he have some powerful skills up his sleeve? He wondered. Just as Jacques was contemplating the situation, the demonic life vitality behind Zen was forming into demonic phantoms. Zen wouldn't admit failure in the competition. To earn the top position during the All Peaks competition and to become the best disciple of Cloud Sect, he couldn't back off just because of a minor setback. He had won several rounds of the competition already. And so, it wouldn't affect his ranking if he lost in the competition with Jacques. However, Zen firmly believed in the never surrender principle. Furthermore, he remembered that the Cyan Dragon had requested his help in securing and consuming the bone spear. So there was absolutely no reason for him to give up. Then don't blame me for the consequences, Jacques said. The arrogance in his eyes faded and was replaced by extreme seriousness. Since Jacques had been able to reach such a high level, he must be a top-class talent too. Since he knew of his abilities, he had always been arrogant and proud. However, Jacques couldn't figure out Zen's real competence. He thus decided not to brag too much. Otherwise, he wouldn't be taken as a talent, but as an idiot instead. He could tell that in this fight with Zen, he should not only be more cautious, but also he should try his best. Now, two top-class talents from Cloud Sect started attacks at the same time. Demonic Phantoms, go! With Zen's order, the 6 demonic phantoms scattered and then approached Jacques from different directions. Soon, they were in front of Jacques. Jacques glanced at these demonic phantoms indifferently. Then he rotated the bone spear in his hand and thrust it toward them. Puff, puff, puff. All 6 demonic phantoms were hit in the center of their bodies. In the next instant, they exploded and turned into wisps of demonic life vitality. With the magical power of these demonic phantoms, even if they had transformed into demonic life vitality, they could gather together and form demonic phantoms again. However, that didn't happen this time. Surprisingly, the demonic life vitality didn't disappear but continued to spread in the air instead. In fact, Jacques had not caused this irregularity in the demonic phantoms' properties, it was Zen who had caused this deliberately. Demonic life vitality was violet-black and could block light and vision. It wasn't long before the demonic life vitality soon covered the center of the battle ring. The other disciples of Cloud Sect were confused when they found that they couldn't see anything in the center of the battle ring. What is this? Why did Zen spread the life vitality? Now we can't see what's going on in the battler ring. What are you talking about? A competition is a competition, not a show. They were battling with their lives, not performing for you. If you want to watch the show, go to Imperial Capital. It's easy to find well-known performers there. Then you can enjoy their performance as long as you want. Zen still hasn't given up despite being in such a difficult situation. He must have some powerful unique skills that he hasn't used before. Who knows how many powerful skills he has. If Zen had any other choice, he wouldn't have blocked the vision of the other disciples with the demonic life vitality. Since he had promised the Cyan Dragon that he would help consume Jacques' bone spear, he couldn't expose the swallowing process to the public. Even though Zen had blocked the visibility of the battle ring with the demonic life vitality, he had no confidence in his success when battling with Jacques. However, he was determined to do his best. Jacques glimpsed at the thick demonic life vitality around him, and then injected a touch of his life vitality into it. In the blink of an eye, Jacques' life vitality was swallowed by the demonic life vitality and turned into demonic life vitality. Jacques said with a slight smile, "I have heard that your demonic life vitality can swallow others' life vitality. It is indeed special. It seems to be at par with my bleached bone distilled soul. I don't know why you spread the demonic life vitality in the battle ring, but what you did is in vain. I will now use my most powerful skill to end this battle." Zen was covered in the demonic life vitality, so it was impossible for Jacques to see his face or expression clearly. Since visibility was low, Zen took out his streamer sword. Obviously, the competition between them was drawing to a close. Jacques initiated the attack first. With a pinch, the erase Sanskrit carved in his dragon bone spear emitted a golden light. After his life vitality had thoroughly circulated through his body, he delivered a most powerful blow. Multiple stabs. Jacques shouted as an incredible pressure was released with the blow and formed a stream of air. Now Jacques had concentrated all the power of the dragon bone spear at the spear's tip. In the light of the golden array Sanskrit, the air stream condensed from the pressure was coated with a thin layer of gold. It lingered around the spear tip slowly. With a thrust of the spear, a loud dragon roar was released. This time, the roar was twice as loud as the last ones. Everyone was shocked when they heard the terrible roar. However, they didn't know what was happening in the battle ring as Zen had blocked their vision with the demonic life vitality. Zen has been losing ground. Now I guess he has been defeated. Yes, but it is possible that aside from being defeated, he has been turned into an idiot as well. It was not easy for Drizzlepeak to find such a super talent like Zen. It will be a pity if he becomes an idiot in the All Peaks competition. Master Wen's face paled when he heard the disciples' discussion. He worried that something terrible might happen to Zen. Yehudi's wound had healed. He stood beside Master Wen and said, "Master Wen, don't take their words seriously. Zen has been in danger many times before. However, he always turned the situation to his advantage. I'm sure that he will be fine." "Yes, but I'm afraid this time is different. You saw that the 3 dragon roars hurt Zen. Now Jacques has combined his attack with the dragon roar. It will be difficult for Zen to stay safe," Master Wen said, depressed. He had placed all his hope on Zen. Yehudi sighed. In fact, he wasn't sure that Zen could dodge Jacques' attack either. After all, Jacques was extremely powerful. His incredible bone spear gave him a bigger advantage. Since the current situation did not favor Zen, Yehudi could do nothing other than comfort Mater Wen. Maybe, Zen figured out a way to get rid of the danger. Yehudi didn't even believe these words. Just then, another deafening dragon roar came from the mist of the violet-black demonic life vitality. This time, the dragon roar was louder than any of the previous dragon roars. The difference between them was significant. If the previous roar of the flood dragon could be compared to a roar from a child, then this roar of the dragon sounded as though it came from an adult. Words couldn't describe the difference between these roars. The roar brought a sense of desolation, antiquity, and dignity. Even if a person exhausted all words in the human vocabulary trying to describe the roar, he wouldn't be able to. Elder Shu, who had been shielding the impact of the dragon roar, was shocked too because even he could sense the menace now. Chapter 277, The General Explanation about Legendary Beasts. Warriors would howl at the very mention of the phrase, powerful momentum. It was a term which included both power and momentum, and that, in simple terms, meant immense amounts of force or strength. The warriors with the strong martial arts skills could perform this powerful momentum to the extreme, and it alone could be used to suppress or even attack his/her opponents. But one needed to keep in mind that strong and weak were not absolute concepts but a relative comparison. Although the momentum contained in the flood dragon had been extremely strong, it still had a hard time affecting and threatening people like Elder Shu. This was because Shu was formidably stronger than Jacques. Therefore, it was reasonable to venture the guess that such strong momentum could not have been launched by Jacques. Whoever launched it forth would soon be found out. The more pressing matter on hand was that Elder Shu, first ranker among all the elders of the Cloud Sect, only weaker than the head and vice-head of Cloud Sect, was not the only one feeling threatened just now. If even he had been affected, then it was not surprising that the situation of people less powerful than him would clearly have been worse. The referee in charge of the match between Zen and Jacques had seen sense a long while back, as he had run out and was now standing at a place he believed to be safe before Jacques took out the bone spear. The referee wasn't weak by any means. But the battle had spread out far too wide for it to be measurable by common sense and common level. The referee was not a fool. He knew exactly that even being involved in the aftermath of this match would end badly for him, and therefore, he had no desire to stay any close. But even with his foresight, he did suffer quite a blow due to the aftermath. The loud roar from the dragon was so intense that its voice felt like a sledgehammer repeatedly hitting on his head. He felt a loud humming voice in his brain and lost his unconscious with a tumble down to the ground. He had been standing the closest to the ring at the time of the match, and therefore, was the one most affected by the roar. And the disciples watching the match were in no better situation than he was. After all, the referee had very recently entered the level of illuminating soul realm, and was still affected. The disciples, who were watching the All Peaks competition, on the other hand, were from a variety of levels, with many of them at the consummation grade of natural level. Worse, some of them hadn't even reached that point yet and therefore, were extremely hurt. Fortunately, Elder Shu's reaction upon hearing the roar had been quite rapid. As soon as he had felt that the dragon roar was exuding unimaginable amounts of momentum, Elder Shu had acted just like he were being confronted by a horde of formidable enemies. He had exercised his skills to force out all his life vitality, and made it pour out like a waterfall. This had let him strengthen the light curtain that was protecting the audience, though it wasn't going to protect them completely. The green life vitality driven out by Elder Shu was so strong and full of energy that the wrinkles on his bark-like hands all disappeared when it infiltrated slowly into his arms. As a result, his hands now looked white and tender. The cultivation method he was practicing and utilizing today was based on superior understanding of vital energy. It was so special that it could rejuvenate him and protect him as well as many others. To be honest, instead of being scared, he was kind of depressed, and even found the whole affair annoying, albeit a bit funny. A match between two junior disciples, Zen and Jacques, had made him react as if he was being threatened by formidable enemies. That was kind of embarrassing to think about. The situation was slightly funny in his mind, but he still had to take it seriously. If he didn't handle the power gushing forth from the dragon roar in a careful way, there were extreme risks involved to the life of everyone else and a distinct possibility that a vast majority of those disciples from each peak would be seriously injured. Rise up! Elder Shu bellowed, and the green light curtain formed by his life vitality immediately surrounded the periphery of the battle ring. Yet, the powerful momentum of the dragon roar was not a means of direct attack, but a spiritual force. It could not be contained physically. The green light curtain formed by Elder Shu could not directly block it, and all it did was greatly weaken its power. All due respect to Elder Shu, because if he hadn't reacted this quickly, there would have been several deaths until now. And even with him greatly weakening the momentum, there were still a lot of disciples who felt dizzy as soon as they heard the roar, and as if that wasn't enough, some disciples with still weaker strength directly passed out. Even personal disciples like Wing, Shini and Dick, who were supposed to be among the top disciples from the 33 peaks with strength extending far deep into the illuminating soul realm, looked pale and had to run their respective cultivation methods to resist the formidable momentum. Patrick, meanwhile, was still sitting on the ground. Though he was affected by the roar, his eyes went deep and his palms clasped themselves together devoutly. He began to utter something silently. Actually, he was exercising his Buddha cultivation method. With his command, 6 golden balls appeared abruptly and kept spinning around him, trying very hard to block the powerful momentum outside his body. Since Buddha cultivation method was broad and profound and his own cultivation method was unique, when compared to Wing and other disciples, his situation was naturally much better. Even then, he wasn't in a very good situation, and was afraid to relax even for a second lest the momentum hurt him beyond repair. Rocher, who had not even touched his sword on his back in any of the fights, was now gripping it tightly with his right hand. His pupils had turned a rather furious shade of flame. The sword, which had not been pulled out from beginning of the competition till now, had always been his greatest reliance. But right now, even though he had not been standing in the ring, there was a strong impulse inside his heart to draw the sword. With great effort, he eventually held it back. With the strength of the shield of his sword, it was quite enough for him to block the momentum the roar had exuded. Kenneth, head of the Cloud sect, once again stepped down from the high platform. His body was burly but he walked down step by step lightly, as if he was walking gracefully on air, like a general possessed by the heavenly god. The expressions on his face were more serious than ever right now, and he was troubled inside, though he did not show it. What's going on? How can the dragon roar have such a strong effect? Kenneth asked seriously with the usual calmness and indifference written on his face, suddenly and finally replaced by a doubtful expression. Elder Shu shook his head and replied, in an extremely concerned tone, Jacques is so powerful that he can exercise the dragon bone spear to this extent. I am afraid that Zen, his voice trailed off. No, Kenneth replied abruptly and shook his head. He was thinking of a lot more than Shu was, so he was obviously more confused than the latter. Then, he continued, no flood dragon is powerful enough to exude a momentum like this. In his eyes, Elder Shu's analysis of the event was too cursory and simple. It was flawed. He simply thought that the dragon roar had been let out by the flood dragon's bone spear, but Kenneth did not believe so. His disbelief didn't arise from the thought that flood dragons could not have burst out a momentum of that degree. Indeed, they were perfectly capable. The momentum that had just broken out in the battle ring was strong, and for the disciples of the younger generation, it was certainly extremely frightening. But in eyes of Kenneth, Elder Shu and other elders who were at comparable levels to them, it hardly deserved a mention in powerful forces of the time. If a real flood dragon had burst out a roar, it would have been powerful enough to turn an entire hilltop into powdery dust. It wasn't the power that Kenneth found formidable. Instead, it was the feeling that roar was giving Kenneth which made him ponder and had him worried. There was something about it, as if it had experienced a nirvana and was now standing at the highest level, looking down on all living creatures as if they were nothing at all. This kind of otherworldly feeling could not have been brought onto him by a flood dragon at all. The flood dragon was an aquatic creature with power over storms and floods, but was not a legendary beast. It was merely a close relative of one since it had dragon lineage behind it. What Kenneth was worried about was the fact that such a powerful effect could only have been achieved by a genuine dragon. He started pondering over things. The idea was a bit far-fetched, but the effect he felt was coming from a super legendary beast. "It's not from a flood dragon?" Elder Shu asked in astonishment. His eyes were full of an incredible expression. "Are you trying to suggest that it has come from a genuine dragon instead?" Kenneth nodded slightly and replied in a solemn tone, "Yes, that's exactly what I'm thinking right now." "Impossible." Elder Shu immediately denied the idea when he heard it, almost out of reflex, completely forgetting that he was talking to his leader at the moment. "A genuine dragon doesn't exist. It is the product of legends, and a figment of our imagination." The world was a big place. There were some people who had practiced hard and made their way to the peak level of martial arts. Then there were those who liked to make up stories and legends about martial artists and legendary creatures. Several years ago, a book called The General Explanation About Legendary Beasts suddenly found itself on the market and gained quite a bit of popularity. It spread all the way from the central region to the eastern region, with various pirated versions, and its popularity was such that the number of copies sold on the black market too was unfathomable. All the public's common knowledge about legendary beasts and super legendary beasts had been derived from the same book and therefore was not too trustworthy. There were remarks in the book which had suggested that genuine dragon, crimson rosefinch, white tiger, and black tortoise were the only 4 super legendary beast races to thrive in this world. There were others too, who belonged to the super legendary beast class, unique, powerful, but unable to thrive or reproduce to increase their numbers. For example, the sky-devouring beast, the 9-colored phoenix, etc. It also spoke of creatures less powerful than the super legendary beast, though still quite incredible. These included the roc, an unfathomably gigantic bird which could transform into a fish, the blue phoenix, the 9-colored deer, and so on. The book was full of legends about those beasts and had even gone so far as to describe a war between the genuine dragon and the crimson rosefinch, which had changed mountains and rivers, made stars fall down, and, in one strange moment, even turned the heavens and the earth upside down. The contents of the book were pretty fascinating, but many strong people sniffed at them, because the authenticity of those contents it described could not be verified. According to them, these unverifiable things were basically legends, stuff of novels could not be taken seriously. And after all, if someone did claim that the dragon was a super legendary beast and it existed, how could it ever be verified? And how could someone be convinced about the ranking of the 4 super legendary beasts without a shard of proof? The flood dragon, on the other hand, could be easily proved as an existent creature, because it did exist and even thrived in the regions that extended across the globe. Denied by Elder Shu, Kenneth heaved a long sigh, and then explained, "I fought for the Cloud Hall about 10 years ago, and I saw the flood dragon during one of my missions. Although I was only able to catch a short glimpse of it, the powerful momentum emitted by the flood dragon affected me very much. I knew there and then that I would remember it for the rest of my life." "Your Grace, you have actually seen a flood dragon?" Elder Shu asked in amazement. The flood dragon, with its blood relation to the dragon lineage, was still very close to a legendary beast. Kenneth nodded and continued in a serious tone, "I can very surely say that the momentum of that flood dragon is basically the same as, or at least similar to the momentum that burst out from Jacques' bone spear. It was a very harrowing experience for me back then, and I can't have remembered it wrong." After a pause, he went on, "But the dragon roar which just emanated from the ring is completely different from the flood dragon's roar. What's more, the feeling inside it was much more profound and meaningful. I am fairly certain that these 2 voices belong to 2 entirely different creatures." After thinking for a while based on the facts that Kenneth had provided, Elder Shu was also immersed in the same doubts as Kenneth. How exactly could Jacques do that? How could he tap into the momentum of a genuine dragon and exude such strong force? Was it the bone spear made from the spine of the flood dragon in his hand? That was completely impossible. As a general rule, Kenneth could have easily detected the real situation through his superior spiritual sense. But right now, there was a demonic life vitality that had completely spread through the arena and no one could see through it. There was something about it that stopped anyone from seeing through it with naked eyes, and even spiritual senses powerful as Kenneth's could not penetrate it at all. As a result, all Kenneth could do was wait for the demonic life vitality to disperse gradually. The stewards of the area, by contrast, were quite busy at the moment. Each of them was roaming around, holding a small bottle in their hands, filled with pills that had the power to nourish souls. As soon as they saw a disciple who was feeling unwell under the impact of the dragon momentum, they gave a pill to him. It was worth noting that the pill wasn't enough for those disciples who had passed out completely. The stewards had to perform emergency medical procedures on site to help them. Therefore, right now, the scene of the All Peaks competition was very noisy and haphazard. Master Wen, also under the impact of the dragon roar, felt unstable and his head was full of a buzzing, humming noise, which was giving him a headache. At this moment, however, he was not worried about any possible damage to his spirit, but about Zen's safety, considering the fact that under the impact of the little bit of momentum which had dissipated from the battle ring and crossed into the audience area, even after it was half weakened by Elder Shu's green light curtain, Master Wen's spirit was still damaged. Now that Master Wen was hurt, what about Zen, who was standing almost at ground zero? Although Master Wen didn't want to figure out the question, his face turned deadly pale when he thought of an answer. Chapter 278, Explanation. Apparently, more than one person wanted to know the result, and Master Wen was the most anxious. Except for the disciples who had fainted, all other onlookers stared intently at the fighting court. As the demonic life vitality cleared slowly, a thin figure was seen standing in the arena. He didn't appear to be athletic, but he was full of strength. He was not tall, but people looked up to him. Zen, Master Wen could not help exclaiming in excitement. At this moment, his eyes were full of tears, and he almost cried. A fierce discussion began among the disciples. Unbelievable, unbelievable, who can tell me what happened just now? Why is Zen standing there while Jacques is lying on the ground? One disciple asked with disbelief. Are you asking me? I don't know either. I actually don't understand this fight at all. Another disciple answered. It was obviously Jacques who was attacking Zen. After all, his attack method used the roar of a dragon. But why is Zen standing while Jacques seems to be hurt? This makes no sense. A third disciple exclaimed with an astonished look. The result of the fight was beyond the expectation of the audience. They could not understand what had happened. Zen shook his head. The streamer sword in his hand trembled when he took a deep breath. His eyes became brighter than before as his soul had upgraded once again. Facing Jacques' attack method, multiple stabs of the dragon bone spear, Zen could bear it with his streamer sword. But he felt it difficult to stand the power of the flood dragon attached to it. Even though Zen had tried his best, he was unsure of Jacques' defeat as the power of the flood dragon was so strong. However, when Zen started fighting with his streamer sword, the cyan dragon in his mind also joined in. The cyan dragon roared and controlled the power of the flood dragon in a second. When Jacques heard the cyan dragon's roar, he was stunned. This reaction gave Zen enough time to summon the black fire inside his body. In the blink of an eye, the black fire consumed Jacques' flood dragon bone spear. Zen didn't expect the result of the melting process. Previously, the black fire would melt a weapon and extract heavenly essence. However, when the black fire melted the flood dragon bone spear, some drops of blood were extracted. These blood drops were different from a person's blood. Regular blood was liquid in form and would splash when it fell on the ground. But these blood drops bounced against the ground like a ball. In the end, the black fire transported the drops of blood into Zen's mind and gave them to the cyan dragon. Of course, the cyan dragon swallowed them. At the same time, two rays of shining light appeared from the mysterious melting furnace. One of them went into Zen's head, and the other flew into Jacques' head. The shining light contained mysterious strength, and it could speed up the recovery of an injured soul. Even if someone's soul had been severely hurt, the shining light could help the soul become as healthy as it was. This was exactly what had happened when Zen opened the mysterious melting furnace for the first time. The refinement process repeatedly destroyed Zen's soul, but the shining light helped it recover every single time. The cyan dragon roared with such a great force a moment ago that Jacques' soul had probably been irreversibly damaged. If the shining light had not been used to treat Jacques, he would probably become an airhead. The seven-colored shining light not only healed Jacques' soul, but it also strengthened it. Zen was certain about this. As Zen had sacrificed Jacques' flood dragon bone spear to the cyan dragon, he felt it was his responsibility to give something in return. Hence, His action was like a secret trade. Considering that the 7-colored shining light healed and strengthened Jacques' soul, it was probably equal to if not more valuable than the spear. From this perspective, Jacques did not suffer a loss at all. The only debatable point was whether or not Jacques would have agreed to swap his precious weapon for the service of the 7-colored shining light. With the streamer sword in hand, Zen waved to the audience to show that the fight had ended. The referee had woken up by now. He swallowed a pill to nourish his soul. Even though he had been injured and didn't have any strength, he struggled to announce expressionlessly, Zen Luo from the Drizzle Peak won. And the personal disciple, Jacques Wang, has been defeated. Just as Zen was leaving the arena, Kenneth and Elder Shu appeared in front of him. Your Graces, Zen cupped his hands and bowed to them. What goes around, comes around. Zen had known that it would be impossible for him to leave without permission since such an unusual thing had happened to him. The expression on Kenneth's face showed that he was still in shock. And it was the same with Elder Shu. They felt the same way as the other disciples in the audience area. They were confused and didn't understand what had happened in the fighting court. Kenneth thought that he knew everything about Zen. He had learned that Zen was practicing the Heavenly Ogre Fist. And he also knew that the Heavenly Ogre Fist had been inherited from the ogres. A copy of the book, Heavenly Ogre Fist, had been preserved in the Heavenly Library and Zen had borrowed it. Kenneth knew that Zen's soul-attacking method was called the Spiritual Thorn and that it was a Tier 4 cultivation method. As per Kenneth, it was an excellent achievement for Zen to have reached such a high level. It was also commendable that he had strengthened his soul despite being so young. While he could understand all these things, Kenneth was still in awe of what Zen had accomplished. Zen's flying knife, although broken, was still a precious weapon with a long history. He must have obtained it by sheer luck. It was hard to tell its worth, but Kenneth didn't pay much attention to it at all. As the head of Cloud Sect, he would never be jealous of a disciple's precious weapon. Not to mention that the flying knife was not a perfect one. Kenneth wasn't that impressed with the Flood Dragon Bone Spear either. Another advantage that Zen had was his mysterious basic swordsmanship. Kenneth guessed that Zen must have learned this on his own. Kenneth also spoke highly of the fact that Zen was intelligent and that he had tremendous potential. All of these facts dictated how Kenneth felt about Zen. Such a talented disciple had impressed Kenneth to the point where he had decided to send Zen to Cloud Hall. As a matter of fact, Kenneth had been quite precise in his evaluation of Zen. If Zen was measured by the talent system of heaven, earth, and human, Zen was at least at the heaven grade. Kenneth used the two words, at least, as he thought that Zen had the potential to reach a higher level of talent than a heaven grade person. Regardless of Zen's talent and his abilities that differentiated him from ordinary people, he could not have survived the dragon roar. Kenneth had examined Zen's body using his senses. He didn't feel as though Zen had suffered from any injuries. On the contrary, Zen's soul seemed to be stronger than before. If Kenneth, the head of Cloud Sect, could speak rudely, he would have asked, "What happened? Who can tell me?" "Zen, congratulations on winning this fight," Elder Shu spoke to Zen first. He had noticed that Kenneth had chosen to stay silent. After quickly glimpsing at Kenneth Shi, Elder Shu continued, "Could you tell us what happened here? Why is Jacques lying on the ground?" "Elder Shu, I don't know how to answer your question. Jacques and I competed in the arena. One of us had to lose, and one of us had to win. It was either him or me. I'm not sure what else you expect me to say," Zen answered. Although he wore a serious expression, Zen's eyes gleamed with slyness. Elder Shu smiled mockingly, and then he added, "I hasted to ask my question. Perhaps I wasn't clear. I want to know what happened during your fight. How did you defeat Jacques?" "Actually, I don't know either," Zen replied in a confused tone. "Jacques came at me with his Flood Dragon Bone Spear. When he used the multiple stabs of the Dragon Bone Spear, I had to use my sword to fight back. Just at that moment, Jacques released a dreadful dragon roar. I felt lost, and I couldn't think clearly. Soon after the roar, some rays of 7-colored shining light appeared. That was when Jacques fainted. Strangely, when the 7-colored rays of shining light touched me, I healed." Since Zen had swallowed Jacques' Flood Dragon Bone Spear, he had to make up this story. In his explanation, some parts were real, and some were not. These statements came together, and no one could tell whether his story was true or false. 7-colored rays of shining light? Elder Shu asked in surprise. He thought hard but still could not tell what a 7-colored ray was. Even more confusing was its quick healing effect on a severely injured soul. He knew some pills were particularly helpful in treating people with damaged souls. But these pills could not work so quickly. If a person's soul had been damaged too severely, the pills might not work at all. The soul of a person was very fragile and difficult to heal. 7 colored rays of shining light. Kenneth also felt puzzled. He repeated the words as he thought of the possibilities. Could it be from the 7-star herb? But that is impossible. There should not be such a herb in the eastern region, Kenneth thought. The 7-star herb is a legend. It is said that if one is close to a 7-star herb, the herb will give off rays in 7 colors. It is good for the soul. But if a 7-star herb does exist, it will change the color of the heaven and the ground. Everyone will be able to see it. It is impossible to hide the herb. How could such a thing happen to Zen and Jacques today? Zen was glad to see that he had successfully misled Kenneth. So he continued his explanation. I don't know what happened just now. And how is Jacques? At this moment, a steward walked up to Jacques and examined his body. After that, he said, "You Graces, Jacques seems to be all right. He is unconscious, but he will wake up soon." Kenneth nodded and remained silent as he contemplated his options. He furrowed his brows as he glanced at Zen. He was still confused as Zen's explanation had not answered his question. "Let me wake Jacques, and we can ask him," Elder Shu said. As soon as he had finished speaking, his hand glowed with a green life vitality. Elder Shu walked up to Jacques and directed the green life vitality to Jacques' body in a steady stream. After a while, Jacques blinked his eyes. "Where am I?" he asked slowly. Zen became nervous. After all, Jacques was the closest to him when he had swallowed Jacques' Flood Dragon Bone Spear. If Jacques had seen that, and he reported it to them, there would be trouble. Chapter 279, An Unsolved Mystery. Jacques had just woken up and he was confused. Unconsciously, he reached for his dragon bone spear, only to discover it was missing. "Now, where is my spear?" questioned Jacques, feeling the panic welling up. His dragon bone spear was extremely important to him, and he had a connection to it after owning it for such a long time, which was why he discovered so quickly that it had gone missing. "Is it in your space ring?" asked Elder Shu curiously. Elder Shu and Kenneth had glanced around and didn't see Jacques' dragon bone spear either and wondered if he had put it away. "No," responded Jacques, but then he wondered if he could be wrong, so he searched his space ring and still didn't find it. "Impossible. How could my dragon bone spear just vanish?" exclaimed Jacques, giving Zen a suspicious glimpse. Zen motioned to Jacques with a wave indicating he didn't have anything to do with it. "Jacques, what happened when you and Zen were battling? Why did I hear a dragon roaring?" Elder Shu inquired about the incident again, even though he'd asked Zen earlier. What Zen told him hadn't made him feel any better. Jacques racked his brain trying to think, where did I put my dragon bone spear? He remembered that he was stunned by the roar of the dragon as soon as he started fighting with Zen, so the details of his fight with Zen were fuzzy. I don't recall. I can remember the deafening sound of a dragon roaring, and the fight with Zen, but, beyond that, everything is a blur. I don't even know what happened later, Jacques said, shaking his head as he tried in vain to remember anything more. Jacques' account of what happened relieved Zen because he would have been in trouble if Jacques told them it was Zen that made the dragon roar. Zen had previously used his demonic life vitality to block their vision, and that would raise suspicions since Elder Shu and Kenneth were both pretty smart guys. It wasn't easy to fool them. The roar comes from within your dragon bone spear, right? Why is it so powerful? Is it because the explosion of your dragon bone spear caused such a powerful dragon roar? Since Jacques couldn't remember any details, Elder Shu offered some suggestions. That's right. What Elder Shu said made Jacques hesitate. Although he couldn't remember what had happened, the final roar was far louder than what the dragon bone spear had done previously. The shock of the roar was like a red-hot iron poker being seared into his heart, and he'd probably never forget how it felt. But where did that last roar come from? Jacques remembered that Brady, the great weapon refiner who built the dragon bone spear, told him that there was still a remnant of a dragon soul within the bone. However, this dragon spine and its soul were tens of thousands of years old. Over time, this soul had almost disappeared, so its power was feeble. Brady hadn't completely destroyed the soul, but he had used runes to seal it. To him, the soul had long since lost its power of resistance, and sealing it within the spear increased the dragon bone spear spirit. Did the dragon soul break the seal and choose to destroy itself? Jacques wondered aloud. Elder Shu nodded in agreement as he pondered. That could be what happened, but where did the glow come from? As he thought about it, he asked, Jacques, did you see a colorful glow in your mind? Colorful glow? asked Jacques, bewildered, and wondered. A colorful glow. I was out like a light. How could I possibly see any glow? Well, does it feel like your soul is any stronger? Elder Shu questioned. Huh, my soul. As soon as Elder Shu asked him, Jacques realized that his soul did feel different. His soul seemed to feel more sensitive and somehow steadier. It felt stronger. At the Cloud sect, there were some secret medicines for soul cultivation, which had healing effects on the soul. If the disciples here wanted to strengthen their souls, they had to take the medication for decades. However, even when they did, the effects weren't noticeable. Jacques' soul had become much stronger in the blink of an eye, which made him extremely happy. But Jacques was frustrated at the loss of the dragon bone spear. If it had happened to anyone else, they would have fainted at the shock. However, Jacques wasn't just talented, and he was also lucky. Although he was devastated at the loss, he believed his luck would drop something better in his lap. After all, his dragon bone spear exploded, and now his soul was much improved. If he had to choose between strengthening his soul and owning the dragon bone spear, he would have given up the dragon bone spear without hesitating, since the means of improving a soul were few and far between. And he just knew he would land a better weapon down the road. However, he didn't realize that it was because of Zen that his soul had grown stronger. Of course, Zen wouldn't be so obtuse as to tell him. Elder Shu gave up questioning after asking twice without a clear explanation. Kenneth shot a meaningful look at Zen before leaving. He hadn't detected anything wrong with the story, but deep down, his gut told him Zen had something to do with what happened. It was just a guess. Kenneth liked Zen very much, so even if he were keeping something to himself, Kenneth wouldn't interfere. The bottle's effects were so great that all the disciples were affected in various degrees with the exceptions of Roche and Patrick. Many of the disciples had to take medicine to heal their souls because of the damage done to their souls. If Elder Shu hadn't intervened in the battle in time, the consequences would have been severe. After the break, the All Peaks competition continued with a new referee on the field. It shocked many spectators when Jacques failed, and Zen was more and more frightening to everyone. How many people could survive a dragon roar like that? Many of the audiences believed the champion of the All Peaks competition would be Zen, but there were still some who did not feel that way. After all, Patrick had an unfathomable power, Roche still hadn't used his sword, and Evan was top-ranked on the Cloud sect's list, and hadn't shown up yet. Zen was able to resist the terrifying dragon roar though, which suggested he had an unusually strong soul, but so what? Fighting other contestants shouldn't rely on their soul strength alone. It should also include their cultivation method along with their life vitality. Since everyone had different styles, Zen's soul strength ranking didn't necessarily mean that he would win the competition. No matter how great his soul was, he couldn't resist Roche's sword, and he couldn't break through Patrick's defenses either. It led many of the disciples to believe that Zen wouldn't be the All Peaks competition champion. These three sat out while everyone else continued participating in the competitions. As the competition went on, the peaks' rankings were determined. Roche, a Skytop Peak disciple, and Zen representing Drizzle Peak were in the top three, which meant one of those two peaks would be the winner, and the other would be the runner-up. That meant that Drizzle Peak, the peak that was the lowest ranked, would surely be one of the top two of the 33 peaks. Add to it, if Zen defeated Roche, then Drizzle Peak would jump from the bottom straight to the top. This rise in rankings would mean massive changes for Drizzle Peak. For example, Drizzle Peak would get a monthly stipend along with more medicine, and the statuses of the disciples of Drizzle Peak would increase. Additionally, Cloud Sect would give them more resources, such as building practicing platforms on Drizzle Peak. In short, Drizzle Peak would enjoy many more perks than previously. So, even if the final results weren't out yet, everyone was excited at Drizzle Peak already. Both the inner and outer Drizzle Peak disciples had a gleam of excitement. Having been selected as members of Drizzle Peak had been very trying for the disciples because it was the worst of the 33 peaks. None of them had expected that a disciple who single-handedly improved Drizzle Peak brought it up until it was one of the top two. And more surprising was that he was still only at the second grade of natural level. The Drizzle Peak disciples never dreamed there would be such a great achievement, and still had a difficult time believing it, even though they were there and witnessed it. Zen's best friends, Worth, Sean and Nori were all excited. Like the other Drizzle Peak disciples, they were proud of Zen's achievements, and even felt honored to know Zen. They had all seen Zen's strength and thought Zen to be an extraordinary person, so they believed he could win. When the All Peaks competition had begun, they thought Zen would at least make it into the top 100. However, when Zen made it into the top 100 with ease and then the top 80, 50, 20, 5 and now the top 3, they felt he could make it to the number 1 ranking. Every improvement was a miracle. If the competition was a play, then the ending would reveal that Zen was the son of a miracle. Master Wen's eyes were filled with pride. He was content seeing how much Zen had achieved. He would be satisfied if Drizzle Peak became the second ranked of the 33 peaks. During the last competition, Yan, Zen's sister, miraculously brought the Lady Peak up to rank 2 by herself. Now, 3 years later, Zen is performing the same miracle, said one of the Drizzle Peak masters as he sighed admiringly. Master Wen shook his head as he said, "It's a miracle, but, then again, Zen's much stronger than Yan." Chapter 280. I believe in Zen too. Yan was undeniably a superb talent of Cloud Sect. An idea of her talent could be taken from the fact that she had bested Zen in both grade and speed. When it was time for the All Peaks competition, she had already reached the illuminating soul realm, and if that wasn't enough, she was only 15 years old at the time. On the other hand, Zen was 17 years old at the moment but was merely at grade 2 of the nature level. So compared to Yan, Zen was quite slow in cultivation speed. However, that did not mean he had been totally overtaken. When it came to fighting capacity, he was several notches above Yan. Not only her, he was above almost all personal disciples. In the previous All Peaks competition, the performance of disciples which were competing on behalf of some peak was not so good. The top 3, and even the top 5 places were all occupied by personal disciples, who had easily outwitted the disciples from the peaks. But this year, the competition had been fiercer than ever and of the top 3 contenders, 2 were fighting on behalf of peaks. They were Zen and Rocher. What was more, neither one of them was at the illuminating soul realm. This was the first time in history that such a result had been seen, and until today, such a result was beyond anyone's imagination. Zen and Rocher weren't the only black horses to break the record. The top inner disciples from other peaks like Wing, Sheeny, Jason, and Jill had also managed to defeat the personal disciples quite easily. So this time, the peak disciples had prevailed over the personal disciples in the All Peaks competition. Among the personal disciples, only Patrick had managed to land a spot amongst the top 5. It was up to him now. As the pillar of the personal disciples, he had mastered the mysterious Buddhist cultivation method and his real strength was too deep for common men to predict. It was all on him now to defend the dignity of the personal disciples. If he lost too, then the year was going to be remembered forever as one when the personal disciples failed completely. Zen, Master Shu of the Skytop Peak murmured the name, lost deep in some thought. Master Shu had a good memory, and even if he hadn't, Zen wasn't the sort of person he would have forgotten easily. He still remembered the time when Zen had entered the Bloody Mountain for the trial practice. Not only had he managed to defeat a master like Ryan, he had also killed the only grade 5 unreal beast of the Bloody Mountain in the end. That way, he had earned the only black crystal fragment for his practice. This was a remarkable achievement, because ever since the time the Bloody Mountain was established, no disciple had ever earned the black crystal fragment. From that moment onwards, Master Shu had become determined to get Zen on his side. He wanted to invite Zen and ask him to join the Skytop Peak. For this sole purpose, he had even gotten into quite an argument with Aura. Unfortunately, not only did that argument go south for him, Aura had also won Zen's heart first. He didn't know what kind of method she had used to persuade Zen, but he was completely devoted to her now. Foiled in his attempts, all Master Shu could do was think viciously, although Zen is a potentially expensive diamond in the rough, does this Drizzle Peak which ranks the last possess any ability to carve him into a shining jewel? Zen had swept everyone aside and stood aloft in majesty. He had shown extraordinary talent in the All Peaks competition and had even become the key opponent of the strongest disciple of the Skytop Peak, Rocher. If Master Shu was given another chance, he would have definitely made another offer to him at a higher price when he was at the Bloody Mountain. As it turned out, Master Shu's initial assessment was wrong. A diamond needed to be polished. Zen was platinum, he shone everywhere, there was no need to polish him. He seemed to be gold replenished with ever-growing spells. But alas, Master Shu had already missed him and that much could not be changed. Aura had already beaten him and enlisted Zen first. Master Shu heaved a sigh and shook his head. Fortunately, Rocher was there fighting for the Skytop Peak. His strength and potential was not lesser than Zen. It was yet to see who was going to be declared the final winner. The round robin continued. More and more disciples whose names were in the lottery box were wiped out. With each passing round, the probability of Patrick, Rocher, and Zen getting pitted against each other increased. Under everyone's gaze, the steward went on drawing lots to decide the competitors of the next round. Finally, after numerous rounds, when he gave the names of the next contenders to the referee immediately announced, Rocher of the Skytop Peak versus Zen of the Drizzle Peak. Finally it happens. The showdown between two super talents of the Cloud sect. I feel like my blood is going to rush out any moment. Will Rocher use the sword? I really want to see his sword. What does it look like? Draw the sword. Rocher looked very calm. He slowly walked towards the arena. Against his graceful steps, Zen also ambled inside, looking calm and relaxed. After they had arrived at the center of the arena and were now facing each other, Zen smiled and asked, "Everyone wants to see your sword today, Rocher. Is it really your plan to let it hang at your back during the entire competition?" Rocher shook his head and smiled as well. "I said this before, I didn't use my sword because there was no need to. I never wanted to make a mystery out of my sword." "But what about now?" Zen asked. "Of course I am going to draw my sword." The crowd hooted after Rocher finished his words. Rocher reached out his slim fingers and grasped the sword on his back. He slowly drew it out from the sheath, inch by inch, each unit making the crowd go wild. Rocher is finally drawing his sword. We have waited for the moment for so long. It looks like Zen is the opponent that he is really worried about. What kind of sword on earth is that? I really can't wait to see it. All the disciples gazed at Rocher's hand without batting an eyelid, curious about what the weapon was going to look like. When Rocher finally took the sword completely out of the sheath, all the people were amazed. "What's this? A rusty sword? Hang on, do swords rust?" "No silly, they don't. So what, is that a common iron sword? My goodness, the sword that Rocher has kept with him all the time is turning out to be a load of garbage." "Huh, only a narrow-minded person like you is going to think it's garbage. With Rocher's strength and knowledge, do you honestly think he is going to put a piece of garbage on his back?" "Okay, you're smart, so tell us what kind of precious sword would rust." The sword Rocher had taken out was indeed covered with red spots. The weapon refining skills of the eastern region had made it possible for any weapons, even the mysterious ones, to get preserved for decades. If well maintained, the spiritual weapons were supposed to last several hundred years without rusting out or losing their shine and sharpness. As for fairy weapons, they could last as long as a span of thousands of years. A sword that wouldn't rust wasn't sure to be the best, but a rusty sword was definitely not a good choice. However, here, the strongest swordsman among the young generation of the Cloud sect was using a rusty sword. It was hard for the disciples of the Cloud sect to accept this. They had great expectation for the sword. Rocher was unaware of what was being discussed among the crowds at the moment. He slowly lifted the rusty sword and pointed it at the ground. "This sword is called the blood-corroding sword," he slowly said. "The red spots on the blade are not rust spots, though they look like them. They're droplets of blood." Zen was a little astonished on hearing Rocher's words. The disciples who were mocking the fact that what Rocher was flashing was only a rusty sword also received a shock. But whose blood would remain so fresh even after thousands of years? Generally speaking, if the blood from a common human had splashed on the sword, it would have become dry immediately and formed some blood spots. But after a period of time, the spots would fade and gradually disappear. No human blood stains would last for over 3 years. But the stains on Rocher's blood-corroding sword had lasted for thousands of years. Was it the blood from some legendary beast? How can blood remain fresh for so long? Zen was also very curious. There was a feeling inside him that the blood could emit some magical power. Rocher shook his head and replied, "I don't know. But this blood-corroding sword has helped me a lot in comprehending the sword philosophy. It also has its own soul that connects with mine. I am telling you this as the courtesy a fellow swordsman shows to another." Zen smiled. Rocher was an interesting person, and polite too. Zen also took out his sword from the space ring. With a tinkling sound, the streamer sword was drawn out from its sheath. "My sword is named Streamer Sword. It's a low-grade fairy weapon. The body of the sword was made by Chase," he told his opponent slowly. "It was made by Chase?" Rocher asked curiously. As a swordsman, Rocher was interested in all kinds of swords. The last time that Zen had taken out this sword in battle, Rocher had curiously felt that it was somewhat familiar, as it was almost the same one he had seen at the second floor of the weapon pavilion. Several unfinished swords made by Chase were placed there. But he clearly remembered that the swords he had seen hadn't been condensed yet, so he was thinking whether he could have been wrong. But when he heard that the streamer sword was also made by Chase, Rocher was sure that it was the same one he had seen at the second floor of the weapon pavilion. But that sword hadn't been condensed. How could it suddenly become a fairy weapon? To clear his doubts, Rocher immediately blurted out, "If I remember correctly, this sword was one of the 3 weapons that Chase had refined before he died. But it was only an unfinished work as he hadn't managed to condense it yet. I wonder who helped you in finishing the final condensation process." To Rocher's knowledge, the 3 great weapon refiners who were still alive did not have the ability to condense a fairy weapon of this grade. He was asking this out of curiosity. He then added, "I am only a little curious to know which master is able to refine a fairy weapon and helped Chase finish his work after Chase died. If you don't want to comment, or are not allowed to, you can stay silent." Generally, a weapon refiner was more familiar with the weapon that he had refined himself. And it was easier for him to infuse his comprehension of the heavenly law into the weapon in the condensation process. If someone other than the refiner himself wanted to condense an unfinished sword of Chase into a fairy weapon, it would have been very difficult. At least no one in the eastern region could have accomplished it. Hearing Rocher's question, all the disciples were also very curious to know the answer. It seemed that there was a story hidden behind the sword. As the disciples of the Cloud sect, they more or less knew about the legend of Chase. And quite a lot of people knew that Chase had left this piece of his work unfinished before his death. They were also itching to know the answer. "Haha, I can tell you. This sword was condensed on the quenching peak by me," Zen answered honestly after thinking for a while. Rocher had been frank with him, so he didn't want to hide anything from him. Moreover, Zen had no qualms about letting everyone know this. Since he had chosen to attend the All Peaks competition, he was going to gain a lot more influence and fame now. As long as he gained enough influence, several of his problems were going to be automatically solved, like Aura, Yan, and some of his own problems. "You condensed it all by yourself?" At the quenching peak, Rocher was deeply surprised and his pupils narrowed. Zen nodded. "To put it more precisely, I used the weapon refining smelter of the quenching peak to condense it." Hearing this, the crowd burst into an uproar. "Oh boy, did I mishear? Zen condensed a fairy weapon by himself. Has he already reached the level of a weapon refining master? Come on, a weapon refining master? That gets on my nerves now. Can't you ever stop exaggerating? He must be bragging unreasonably about this. Any person's energy has got limits. He would have had to practice martial arts to reach such extraordinary level of fighting. Is it really possible for him to condense a fairy weapon at the same time? But this is not something easy to brag about. Anyone can find out. There are so many disciples in the quenching peak. If it is a lie, they would expose it immediately. Zen has no reason to tell such a stupid lie." Hearing this, Kenneth exhaled deeply. He glanced at Elder Shu who was sitting next to him. Getting his message even without him saying anything, Elder Shu nodded and said, "I will send someone to the quenching peak to confirm it." Weapon refining masters were also very important to the Cloud sect. No wonder that Kenneth was attaching such great importance to the matter. "Do it immediately. Then get news to me as quickly as possible. But I don't think the result really matters." Kenneth heaved a sigh and shook his head. Elder Shu asked, "Do you believe Zen's words that he condensed the sword himself?" "What do you think?" Kenneth asked back. "I believe him," Elder Shu replied with a smile. Kenneth pointed his fingers at Elder Shu. He didn't know what to say about Zen's talents that he had shown along the way. He finally replied, "I believe in Zen, too. He has already given me a lot of surprises. Forget about the claim that he can refine a fairy weapon himself. Even if he claims that he is the reincarnation of an immortal, I will also believe it." There was probably not a single other soul in Cloud sect who could get such a comment from Kenneth.